All right, we are going to get started. Don't make me use the gavel. All right. Debbie, are you okay? Everything okay? Okay. All right, we're going to get started. Okay, welcome everybody. Today is April 11th, 2022. This is the Augmented Curriculum and Program Committee. We are getting started at 4:01. Thank you for being here. And just so people know, we also have a Zoom audience. So those out there in Zoomlandia, welcome as well to this meeting. Unfortunately, folks that are on Zoom will not be able to call in for questions or comments, but the folks in our audience will be able to do so as usual. So welcome again. We have a number of items, action items and informational items on the agenda. Let's see, Debbie, can you take note that all commissioners are present at this meeting? We're going to go in order unless I'm told to do otherwise by our Dr. Priestley. So action items, the first one is Board Policy 5127, Graduation Ceremonies and Activities. Dr. Priestley.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you. We have Bill Sanderson here today, who will present on the topic of summer ceremonies for students.
Welcome, Bill.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. How are you doing? Great. Thank you. Good to be here. I'm sorry.
We were talking about that earlier. And then I totally forgot. We have the opportunity for translations, interpretation services for this committee meeting in both Chinese and Spanish. So we're going to make that announcement in those languages right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. Good afternoon, everyone. San Francisco Unified School District is providing Cantonese and Spanish interpretation today via Google Meet. So if you need Spanish or Cantonese interpretation, please dial the following phone numbers. For Cantonese, please dial 1-484-854-3328 and enter PIN number 721-609-895#. For Spanish interpretation, please call 1-319-382-9676 and enter PIN number 665-996-976#. And this message will be repeated in Cantonese and Spanish. 大家好。三藩市聯合校區喺今晚個會議度係會提供廣東話嘅傳譯服務，所以如果你需要廣東話嘅傳譯服務，請打電話到1-484-854-3328，然後輸入密碼721-609-895呢度咧就會聽到同步嘅傳譯服務。多謝咁多位。
Buenas tardes. Si usted desea servicios de interpretación en español para la reunión de esta tarde, por favor contáctese a través de la plataforma de Google Meet llamando al siguiente número de teléfono: 1-319-382-9676 y una vez conectado, entre el siguiente número de acceso: 665-996-976 y el símbolo numérico. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, our interpreters. You may proceed, Mr. Bill.
Thank you so much. So before you today is a change in Board of Education policy around students' participation in graduation exercises. Prior to the pandemic, as you know, students that had not completed the graduation requirements on the date of graduation were not able to participate in graduation ceremonies. We've had some significant changes in our graduation ceremonies over the past few years. One year we were all virtual, and then last year we were, for the first time, and I am extremely excited about this, we hosted graduation activities at 2 sites. So sites did not have to find their own location and all of that kind of stuff for them to graduate. And this year we will follow in the same suit, and graduation will be held at either Kezar or the McAteer campus as it was in previous years. With that being said, Prior to this, we also had students that went to summer school and they had their own graduation, which was in July. And when we started looking at this through an equity lens, staff came together and we looked at some data and we looked at some other districts that surround us. And we believe that it's in the best interest of all students to allow students that are going to complete the graduation requirements in the summer, that they be allowed to participate in the graduation exercises. They just will not receive the diploma until they actually are completed with their requirements for the diploma. That is the change in the policy that is before you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanderson. Okay, I'm going to open it up to public comment. If you want to comment on this item, please come to the podium. You'll have 1 minute. And then we'll open it up to the board, or the committee.
Good afternoon, commissioners and staff. Thank you so much. I just heard about this and I'm thrilled. I just want to say thank you so much. That is a wonderful, wonderful way to move forward for equity in our district. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. All righty, so commissioners, any comments? First of all, this is an action item, so we'll need a motion in a second.
I'll make a motion that we approve it. Or
No,
send it.
motion, it's just a motion and second to hear it.
Oh, sorry. I'm moved to hear it.
A second.
Okay, now we'll have discussion and then we'll vote. All right, go ahead. Commissioner Hsu.
Yeah. First of all, I think this makes a lot of sense because the colleges, at least UC Berkeley does this, that they participate in the graduation ceremony, but then don't get their diploma until they actually can get their diploma. I have a question. Would this save us any money? Because you mentioned the summer had its own ceremony before.
Thank you so much. That is an excellent question. Well, the summer we would save the cost of having to do a separate activity for summer graduates. So obviously we would save some money. I do want to say that we are very fortunate with some gifts from the city that we're able to put together the Graduation for All initiative, and I don't want to shy away from that. So I think overall it will save us money from having to put together a separate ceremony.
Anything that saves us money is good. Thank you.
And I also want to note to my boss, she told me I couldn't do this in 5 minutes or less, and I did it. Thank you.
We'll see if we can hold up our side of the bargain. All right, Commissioner Alexander, do you have any comments or questions?
I wouldn't want to try to break that record, so no.
All right, so let's do a roll call vote on this item. To move this forward with the positive recommendations of full board.
Commissioner Hsu,
Yes.
Commissioner Alexander,
Yeah.
Commissioner Sanchez.
Yes,
The positive recommendation moving forward.
all right, thank you, well done.
Thank you for helping me out with that 5 minute or less goal, okay? Have a good evening.
You too. All right, the next action item is resolution number 2110-12A1. Reading is critical to lifelong success update. Dr. Priestley.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. I'm going to invite our CNI English and Language Arts team up to the board. We have a very short presentation as an update to the board on this particular resolution.
I see some old friends of mine.
And I'm just going to have each of them
Yes.
introduce themselves and their title, and then we'll begin with a short presentation.
Thank you so much. Just make sure you just press your.
Good afternoon, Lisa Levin, Supervisor of English Language Arts, Elementary.
Hi, Susie DeBlois, Supervisor of Secondary English Language Arts.
Hi, Katie Eller, Program Administrator for Elementary English Language Arts.
Welcome.
So glad to have my team here today. We have a very short presentation. We want to thank everyone for this opportunity again to share and provide this update. The literacy resolution was previously introduced to the board and sent to the curriculum committee for review on 2 separate occasions in December 2021 and January 2022. And today we will update on the revisions made to the original literacy resolution and ask for action moving forward. Next slide. So in looking at the mission statement, I am reminded that the literacy resolution is truly an emphasis on the each and every, receiving quality instruction. Throughout the process of revisions and in collaboration with underwriters of the resolution, there were many agreements. We agree that our students deserve the highest quality possible in their instruction, and there is a need for change. We also agree that our current status in teaching and learning, as well as our collection of materials and resources, are not exactly where we want them to be. The revised resolution is meant to be inclusive of all students and making them the center of this work, allowing for flexibility and engagement of an array of stakeholders in an effort to be fiscally responsible and correlate with existing processes that are already in place. Next slide. As you can see on the slide, this is an overview of work that has already occurred. I want to take this opportunity to begin to briefly outline the work that is currently happening that a few may know and we want others to learn about. There has been a curriculum audit of our literacy materials. There has been a walkthrough of the teaching and learning in our classrooms, and there will be an update on that audit in next month. An early grades literacy pilot where data can be collected over time and focus groups engaged is already in the planning stages. We have a partnership with UCSF on dyslexia, and there is a STAR early literacy assessment that is being piloted by the RTIFs in the spring. We are continuing to expand professional development on the best practices in literacy to bring those to our students. Next slide. Additionally, we'll be working with RPA in partnership to pilot a screener and collect data on this pilot. As you can see, there will again be stakeholder feedback as part of the process. Also, we are narrowing our focus in literacy on the foundational skills and word study. This is just a preview of what the audit has provided to us and how we can move forward. We are working closely with TNTP to help guide us through a process that will be extensive, that will look at valued research, other districts who have experienced high levels of success, and begin to work with us on building out criteria on how we can move forward. Next slide. And actually next two, so you can go to the next one as well. We're already to our last slide. As previously mentioned, there's a significant amount of work that is already underway with this team. I want to highlight that we are engaging our middle school leaders in a literacy pilot that will take place during next school year. We will continue to offer professional development in partnership with our university partners for teachers who directly teach with students. The revisions to the resolution are broad in nature, but they are meant to narrow the focus to allow for data collection, engage a broad group of stakeholders, consult with experts, and outline a strategic process for materials review and implementation. This is all being done with students in the center. We are conscious of what this work means in the short and the long term. We want to build out a process that allows for long-term gains, sustainable impact, and the meeting of our mission. That is a summary of our revisions, and we look to the board for next steps. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If you have a comment or a question regarding this item, please come to the podium. You'll have 1 minute each. There's some feedback, I know. Yeah, when we have more than one mic, we have an issue sometimes. All right, I really want to thank you all for being here. Please proceed. 1 minute each. Please press the button.
Can you hear me? Okay. 1 minute, all right. My name's Megan Potente. I am a former SFUSD teacher. I'm a parent of an SFUSD graduate, parent of a child with dyslexia who no longer attends SFUSD, and I currently am co-state director for Decoding Dyslexia California. The revised resolution will do nothing to address SFUSD's reading outcomes and does not maintain the spirit of the original resolution. I'm going to cut to the chase because I only have 1 minute. This resolution is a complete insult to the dyslexia community. Every single one of the 15 occurrences of the word dyslexia has been omitted. Dyslexia is a learning disability that is recognized under federal IDEA law, and SFUSD cannot claim to be equity focused while at the same time put forth a reading resolution that fails to even acknowledge, and let alone address dyslexia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Henry, a current a parent of a San Francisco Unified student. I was in support of the resolution presented on December 13th because it was a start on the collaborative solution to the abysmal literacy outcomes in this district. I am against the current resolution presented today. It is a shell of the spirit and actual resolution presented. The ineffective reading curriculum choices and processes currently utilized by San Francisco Unified School District must be abandoned in favor of structured literacy. Curriculum choice matters. My dyslexic son outside of San Francisco Unified was able to make 5 years of progress in less than a year. With the appropriate science-backed curriculum. Prior to our interventions outside of San Francisco Unified, my son hated school, self-harmed, shut down to all interventions. It is also imperative that we screen for the students. Remediation becomes orders of magnitude more expensive as time progresses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I press this again? Sorry. I'm a parent of a struggling reader who also was diagnosed with dyslexia. He has been through the entire system, Tier 1, Tier 2, and then Tier 3. None of them worked. He is now currently approximately 4 grades behind in reading level. That's with a parent who was strongly involved from day one. That's with educators who cared and put forth every effort that they could. We have to strengthen Tier 1 in order to be effective for students like my son. By removing just the word structured literacy, we're not allowing that dialogue. I supported the prior resolution because of the spirit of the collaboration it was a part of the process. It's allowed the conversation that needed to be had to happen. Now we are removing everything that I hold dear. How are we going to start a conversation if it continues in a silo? You can't do this work in a vacuum. One last thing, you need teacher buy-in, and that includes general educators, SPED educators, community activists. This new resolution is not the way. And it broke my heart.
Hello, my name is Rex Ridgway, and I am here on behalf of those parents who are and educators who are against this. I'm going to read some schools and their scores. Charles Drew, only 19% read at grade level. Bret Hart, only 8% read at grade level. Paul Revere, 19% read at grade level. Sanchez, only 18% read at grade level. And Flynn, only 21% read at grade level. Why did I choose these 5 schools? Because these 5 schools were pulled out of 75 schools that the state of California has to pull away from Lucy Calkins and F&P and put them on structured literacy and find out that's the difference of why these schools are not performing at grade level. So when we look at the reading resolution, the way it is now presented, everything that mattered has been pulled away from it. Structured literacy and leaning again toward things that are not working. I read those schools because of the 75 schools that the state of California had to pick are elementary schools. They picked these 5 schools in our district to pull them away from what we were hoping that you guys would have on the literacy, the resolution. And now that the literacy resolution has taken away structured literacy, these 5 schools now are going to go to that and see if there's a difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Michelle Jacques, Monegas, Coordinator for the Parent Advisory Council. I just want to point out that the handouts actually, I think, only printed every other page, so it's incomplete that was provided. And I'm going to speak to you first as a parent advocate and encourage you to listen to these families that are here today and to all the others who have things to share about this. And now I'm going to speak to you as a parent of a former SFUSD student who went undiagnosed with dyslexia for her entire academic career in this district, who only figured it out on her own as a young person, and struggled with self-confidence, struggled with the ability to write well, and succeed in her classes as a result. So please listen to these folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Please do. Turn. It's not your fault.
Yeah, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Thank you.
way different. Hi, my name's Tara Sessa. I am one of the teachers in San Francisco. I don't have anything like prepared to say, but I was one of the like original authors of the first draft, and I've been working with members of CNI to help revise it. I just, no one else that was working on it was able to make it because this meeting starts so early. But we'd all like to see the working group be put back in rather than the way it's written now. And so I don't know. Alita is on her way, but she's stuck in traffic. And we just really, we want to continue to work with CNI. Hopefully we're still invited to come talk about it because we do want to include that. And as a dyslexic myself, I'd really love it if we can get it in there once, because I think that's really important. It's just one facet of who I am and one facet of who our students are as readers and as writers. And it is important for that to be recognized. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Murray Metzger. I'm a mom to 3 SFUSD students. I'm also a psychologist who specializes in working with struggling learners, including many SFUSD students. And as the resolution's written now, I don't think it's going to help struggling readers much. But I do ask you to do something quickly about instruction in SFUSD. 2 things you can do. Hire a superintendent who recognizes the problems we have with literacy and sees it as a top priority and understands the need for structured literacy instruction. And ideally, they'd have a proven track record of making changes and likely difficult decisions to improve reading levels. And secondly, please insist that the literacy curriculum audit consultants present directly to you the findings, because it's a hot button issue, and I think your best chance of hearing unbiased results will be directly from the audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Alita Fisher, Advocacy Chair for the Community Advisory Committee for Special Education. Now out of breath because I literally ran to get here in time to give public comment. I first want to thank everyone in curriculum and instruction who's been working with those of us who helped to author this. But I have to say, I think we're all very disappointed in where the resolution stands now, not the work that CNI has been doing to meet with us. But there are no teeth in this resolution. This resolution, everything that we have been fighting for our students has been stripped out of this resolution as it's written. There's no accountability in this resolution. There's no mandate to do better. It's so watered down as is, it's worthless. We love you guys and we want to continue to partner with you, and we recognize that you are doing a lot of tough work, and we recognize that you don't have the resources you need to do right by students in this district. We recognize that everyone needs to be part of this resolution, not just CNI, and it shouldn't fall just on CNI to implement this. That's why we want the working group. We want shared responsibility and accountability across the district, not just all the work to be done on the shoulders of CNI. That's not fair. Each and every one of us should be accountable for all of our students and better reading outcomes and better success for our students. That's why we want the working group. We recognize.
Ms. Fisher,
Okay, thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you for everybody for coming out to hear this item and to speak to it. Maybe Dr. Priestley, you can kind of take us through the journey of when this resolution started. I noticed it was originally authored by commissioners that are no longer with us, Lopez and Collins, and I think Commissioner Alexander's name is on the current one, so maybe you can speak to it as well. But where it started and where we're at, just kind of maybe give us a couple minutes of your thoughts.
Glad to share. It came to the board in the fall, this resolution, as you mentioned, through Commissioner Lopez and Commissioner Collins. And I want to say even previous to that time, the Deputy Superintendent and myself, Enikio Ford Mathel, had been working with the commissioners around literacy. And we know that it's been a very big issue for the constituents of the community. And there's a lot of interest around early literacy, particularly in the work that we were doing. I want to say that I think even prior to that, when I came to the district 3 years ago, the top charge was, for me, was around raising quality instruction. That has been on the radar. What I will say is 6 months after my arrival, we all went into the pandemic, right? And so we have begun the work of looking at Tier 1, walking through schools, talking to our leaders, looking at where we had knowledge gaps and beginning to address those. And so we turned our attention to the pandemic, particularly from our office in supporting schools with materials, writing curriculum specifically for the pandemic, teaching courses, things of that nature, holding office hours for teachers, professional development. There were a vast array of things that were taking place. Now that we are been able to come out of the pandemic, we've had an opportunity to begin to address those concerns that have been in our community for a long, long time. And so the scores that the gentleman read resonate with me. Those scores have been in our district for decades. They're not new. And if and there's been work to address those. And we need to be more strategic and I believe more narrowed in our focus and to do that. But all that to say, to date, how we came to this place was it came to the committee and there were various presentations, one from the ELA team and one from the co-authors. And at that time, beginning in January, we were given the charge to go back and collaborate and work through a series of revisions. And so we've been meeting weekly when possible for an hour, hour and a half at a time to literally basically go through the resolution and talk about the different points of it. And that's been very enlightening for all of us. I want to say that's been like gold. I mean, it's so much to learn that we can learn from each other. And I think we want to continue those conversations. We want to continue to have folks at the table who are really invested in this work. So we've reached a point where we needed to move this forward. Our community's been waiting, and there are some contingency points that you've heard from various folks who've come to the podium, and we want to acknowledge those. What we want to make sure is that we have a resolution that is fiscally responsible, given our current budget circumstance, something that we know is manageable and doable, also has impact, and also will give us the flexibility we need to meet the needs of all students. So we're here today with that background.
Okay, thank you. And if any of the panelists would like to chime in, feel free at any time as well. I'm going to open up to my colleagues here, but I just have a clarifying question around several people mentioned that dyslexia itself is not actually mentioned in here, although there is mention of a screening tool. And so is that screening tool for dyslexia?
Yes, it is. The partnership that we have with UCSF Dyslexia Center is a specific screener for dyslexia. We have been meeting with them almost since I arrived. And again, we returned to the pandemic, and coming out of the pandemic, we have been working with RPA, and we have approved a research project just in the last few weeks. We are looking to identify a school where we can launch that particular pilot in the fall. That pilot comes with extensive training for the schools. It will come with materials. It will come with investment from UCSF. We're looking to hopefully launch something very successful with the intent of expanding that in the future years.
Thank you for clarifying. Commissioners, questions or comments? Commissioner Alexander?
Yeah, maybe I can just frame kind of my involvement. So I was asked to step in as sponsors of this resolution when the original authors were no longer on the board to ensure that it moves forward. And I think from what I can tell, there's broad agreement. Every single person I've talked to agrees that we need to do better when it comes to early literacy work with our students. The scores that our public commenter read, but we could look at lots of other data points that say the same thing. We're not doing, it's not acceptable, and I think everyone has said that, and we need to improve. And so I think the question is how, and what's our strategy? And I think that this is an important discussion and debate that's going on. And so I just want to say for myself, I'm not wedded to this particular detailed language. But I am wedded to something that our staff can implement. And I think that and so to me, it seemed like the dialogue that was happening since January seemed very productive. But it also seems like if we're going to have a resolution that it can't just sit around forever. So I think that's the intention here. I mean, if, from my point of view, I'm not wedded to a resolution either. I mean, the work's going to happen whether we write a resolution or not. I think the collaboration is essential. I think it's important for you folks to be at the table and to continue the dialogue. And it sounds like our C&I team is really eager and open to do that in some form. So I just want to say, like, in terms of as the author, that's kind of where I'm coming from. But I'm also not wedded to passing a resolution that people think is worthless either. There's no point to doing that either. So I think the work is what matters. And so just as an opening frame there.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize for I am new. I don't apologize for that, but for not knowing very much about the background. I had a question of why was this resolution drafted in the first place? I mean, we all agree, from what I heard, we all agree that there's a problem, we need to fix it. Was it because it was not moving, we're not fixing it, and people got impatient, or is it too slow? Why?
I think there are several reasons. I think there is, in the last several months, 7 years, you heard there are many references to dyslexia. I think that's become a very I want to say a hot and button topic. I think it's something that has grown in terms in people learning about it, recognizing that it encompasses a range of learning issues. I think there's an opportunity to explore how we can build out resources in our school to support that. And I would say traditionally that has not been strong across SFUSD. We're just beginning that journey. I think I think the intent, and I don't want to speak on anyone's behalf because I did not draft it, but I do think there's intent to want to shine light and create an urgency there. And I think that's right. And so I think, we know there's work that needs to be done, but in some ways that language is also limiting to how we might move forward as well. And so it's kind of the double-edged sword. But I want to say, I think it's more about expanding how we look, particularly at students with reading challenges and how we might address them.
Can I continue? Okay. So it sounds like that we were missing some specific dyslexia-related programs here in SFUSD, and that prompted a group of parents and others to ask for that. But then since then, we have SFUSD, your team has gone beyond that to broaden it to more of a general reading literacy not just dyslexia related. Is that fair to say?
Our focus, and one of the commenters raised this, we really want to focus on our tier one. And I think where we know we need to start are the early grades. You know, we talk about kindergarten and first. I would be remiss if I didn't say early ed. And starting in early ed and pre-K and TK, how can we build strong foundational skills for our students so they can be readers by the end of second grade? And that's what the research would indicate that where students need to be. And we want to make sure that we can garner resources that can do that work. And I want to say this is not just about the curriculum resources. We have a range of things that need to happen that would move student achievement. If it were just as easy as the resources, it would have happened already. We've had many resources over many years that have not, I don't want to comment on that, I'm just going to say that we need to do work beyond the resources. We need to think about implementation. We need to train teacher training. We need to think about how we reach students across the entire school year, beyond the school day. There are many different facets to that. And we want to be all encompassing. And in some ways, the original resolution narrowed our focus so much that we might leave many other things out.
But it also sounds like the original resolution prompted the work that ensued, and that seems to be a good thing. No?
I wouldn't say that. I know Susie's going to be anxious. I'm going to let her comment. I would say, like I said, the work has well been underway for many years. And I tell anyone, you know, San Francisco is much like the Titanic. It's a big ship and it's complex. And it moves slowly in some ways. It turns slowly. Like, we got to really take the steps we need to take to make the work stand, right? You know, it's not a quick right turn. And I'm going to implement this particular item or make this particular purchase and expect to see results. And I would say we've been building the capacity for a long, long time. I'm going to let Susie comment on that because she's been part of this work over the years and she has seen it grow. And I think, you know, she's been very committed to it, as everyone on this panel has. And I want to say to them, as well as to the constituents here, that they've been steadfast in making sure that we've seen steady and small, you know, bits of growth. And we want to accelerate those. And we're trying to think about how we can do that. So
before you go, can somebody define tier one for me? I really apologize. I'm not from.
The easiest thing is the day-to-day instruction the students receive in their core classes: English, language arts, math, social studies. Think of it as their first touch instruction, but their general education teacher that they're assigned to, their first touch instruction that we receive each and every day.
And then I assume then there's tier 2, 3, 4, 5. How many?
Yes.
3. Okay.
And those would be various levels of intervention.
Got it.
Right,
Thank you.
Up to special education for tier 3.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to state, Commissioner Shu, that we have a presentation that's available in board docs from earlier this calendar year where we presented about the dyslexia work that has been happening prior to this resolution. So that would be a good resource to check out to see what was there, what has been happening for many years. I would also say that at a point where during our collaboration with our collaborative partners, one comment was made of, gosh, if I had known that y'all had done all of this, we might not have needed a resolution. So in some ways, some of the conversations we had and some of the information sharing that happened as a result of the collaboration really was uplifting prior work that hadn't been shared out or hadn't been heard. So that's where I was wanting to make sure to respond to your question of, but then you did all this other work. That work was had already been done. It hadn't been shared in a way that was able to be known throughout the whole district, throughout the Titanic, as Dr. Beasley said.
I'm not going to allow us to use the Titanic anymore.
Well, it sounds like that we need to do a better job of sharing information and also do a better job of tracking progress, because it sounds like maybe one is not letting the public know that this work is being done. 2 is maybe still not being done fast enough for the public's desire, right? So if we can work on both of those in communicating as well as either move faster, or if we're not the big ship, I won't say the word, or maybe find, define smaller, whether it's pilots or whatever language we use in education here, so that it can go faster, people can see, and then with the intention that from the pilots, I hear that, I have questions about that, actually. So that way, combined with, I'm sorry, I'm from the business field, I want to say marketing, but communicating to the public of our progress, I think that would help. So can I ask the question about the audit and the pilot a little more? Yeah.
Is this the TNTP work? And then tell us what TNTP is again. It's the new teacher project.
It is, it's called the New Teacher Project. They call them TNTP as their acronym. We have engaged with them to do a literacy audit for this year. I will say there has been no audit previously, or at least to anyone's knowledge that I have been able to access. There has been no record of an audit previously. So for the first time, we've had a literacy audit that reviewed our curriculum materials in various grades. I believe it was kindergarten, first, third, and fifth in those grades. And then just in March, we had a walkthrough of 15 different elementary schools in those grade levels, and they looked at the teaching and learning portion that happened in the classroom. And we've been working with them to review those findings and to begin to talk about how we can move forward. And there's been a lot uncovered. There's been areas where we know that we have strength, but we also know there are areas that we've had challenge and where we need to grow, and they've shared those with us, and we'll be sharing those with the board next month.
And would they, without divulging all the recommendation stuff, would they include things like screening for dyslexia and perhaps changing or modifying the curriculum that we are currently using?
I would say that is very spot on. I would agree, yes. Some of those things are included.
Go ahead, Commissioner Alexander.
Well, I was just going to pick up on something Commissioner Hsu said earlier and was asking about the dyslexia focus. And I think that is one of the tensions I see here, where there's a group of parents and teachers who spoke eloquently earlier today about their own experiences and seeing the gaps in the system around young people with dyslexia, which is important. And it's something that it sounds like have been working on and need to continue doing better on. And those reading scores that Mr. Ridgway cited did not just come from young people with dyslexia. There's a whole range of reasons why those happen. And so I think, to me, that's where I see some of the tension here is, if we're going to write a resolution that's about dyslexia, that's one thing. This resolution, in my understanding, was titled to be around literacy. And if it's around literacy, that was why I was, just to be clear, in favor of the staff edits. So these edits were made by staff, but I agreed to sponsor them because it felt like they were taking an approach that was appropriate for thinking about literacy district-wide. If it's helpful to increase the focus around dyslexia in here in terms of the language, I think that would be something that would make sense, as long as we understand that there's a whole realm of reasons, like a literacy strategy is much larger than that, because there's a lot of issues that go into determining whether or not young people learn to read. And just speaking from my own personal experience and with 20 years of experience as a teacher and principal in this district, we've never had a really coherent, at least in recent years, when I would say, since I've been here, a coherent quality approach to early literacy in this district. I think there's an effort to build one that's been going on, but schools have a lot of autonomy. There's a lot of different things happening in different schools, some of which is working, some of which isn't working. And I think part of what I see the team trying to do is to really bring that together, learn from best practice through this audit, and move us on a more unified path where schools are still going to need flexibility and autonomy to a certain degree to meet the needs of their student population, but there's certain things we know work, and we need to be able to say, this is how SFUSD approaches early literacy. And again, we also need to be able to say, this is how SFUSD addresses dyslexia, and those are related things, but they're not actually the same thing. So I just wanted to highlight that.
I have a question. Must we have a resolution to do the work that we want to do?
So thank you. That's what I was going to just recommend, is that this be essentially staff work with community that's monitored by the board, but it doesn't necessarily have to go through the resolution process, because if you're adopting the work and you're moving forward with it, it doesn't necessarily entail that we have to have a resolution, in my regard.
Well,
But
sorry.
Legal, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I mean, the author can withdraw a resolution at any time, and the committee, short of that, can send the resolution back with no recommendation or with a no recommendation.
Did you want to ask?
Sorry, that sounded like the same thing, with a no or a no recommendation.
I am more interested in the work being done. It sounds to me like a resolution is a mandate. I think somebody even used the word mandate. And it sounds like it came from frustration, that you're not doing it or you're not doing it fast enough, so I'm going to make you do it with a resolution. And perhaps that was some of the way that things were done, perhaps even till recent times. But we are starting a new chapter. If the work can be done and can be communicated and done quickly enough so that we see progress being made and not just taking years, and you've been talking about it for years, but nothing happens, well, I'm gonna make you do it, that kind. So if we acknowledge that frustration from the community and we promise to do better, not just promise, actually, I want to see some metrics. I want to say dates and deadline, because nothing gets done without a deadline. So can we put some deadlines, put milestones with deadlines, and let's track to them. And also with data to support the results. You know, if we have a pilot, let's show some before and after data along with the deadline. Can we do that? And then maybe dispose of the resolution, but replace it with concrete plans with deadlines and data.
You've asked 4 questions, so do you have a response?
First of all, I want to concur, we're very interested in collecting the data. And we are very interested in making informed decisions in terms of how we move forward. And really trying to understand if what we are piloting is working, with students, and then how we can support it long-term. We can very much come back to this forum as frequently as needed to update the public and to share those milestones. And I think that's something we should do. I also want to say, I would still be very interested in partnering and communicating with folks who have been part of this journey, because I think that's also very important. And I want to, be candid and say I'm more about being inclusive in this process than not, because we do need a lot of voice around it, and we do need different perspectives, and we do need to be, learning from each other and making sure that, we are covering all of our bases. So I just want to acknowledge that, if there is, the resolution and doesn't come into fruition, I would still like to pursue that and offer that.
Yes, thank you very much.
I have another comment on Commissioner Alexander's comment earlier, is that curriculum and instruction should not be tasked with everything connected with literacy, right? Because I can think of maybe the kids don't come to school to learn, I don't know, for whatever reasons, family, environmental, others. So I think there are other areas of SFUSD and maybe other departments that need to get involved for that. And I have this comment for the budget process too. The budget department shouldn't be the only one moving numbers around. Everybody's actually has to be committed to, doing that budget. But same comment here is that C&I shouldn't be the only one tasked with this job. I think it takes a whole school district, all the departments, as well as the community to really work together to achieve that. But coming back, I really would like to see a plan with milestone and dates and data. Can we have that?
So would you like to respond to that question?
I think we'd be glad to do that, and I think we could do that as part of the follow-up with the audit. I think that would be appropriate time, which is hopefully we'll be able to present in May. We are expecting to present on May next month.
Okay, so we'll have it back here. Yes, at curriculum. Just wanted to mention, because it's been mentioned here a couple times, around absenteeism. There is a link, obviously. If students aren't in school, then literacy is not going to happen at an optimal rate. And so in a later presentation on the Safe and Supportive Schools resolution, upwards of 50% of African American students in the fall of 21-22 school year are chronically absent, as well as for Latino students it's about 33%, and for Pacific Islanders it's 66% for Samoan. So it's just what we're seeing right now is obviously catastrophic, and it's not totally new, but the numbers have never been this high. And so we have a lot of work to do, obviously, in making sure that students are at school and in their seats and with their teachers and peers learning together. So that goes hand in hand. We could have the best literacy program and screening programs ever created, but if our students are not in school, it's just not going to work out. So that's for a later presentation, but I just wanted to also say that one other factor that leads to some of the numbers that we were talking in the 15 schools that were mentioned, or the 5 schools that were mentioned, oftentimes what's happening is that we have such a high turnover of teachers in the schools that we're talking about. And so that too, even if you have the best program, the best literacy program in the world, you will never get a toehold or a foothold on that programming if we continue to have this churning turnover of staff and teachers at those schools. And so until we really handle that, and it's a larger issue, it's a contractual issue, there's a lot of things that go into it, we're going to continue to see these kinds of really horrible data points. So did you want to add to that? Go ahead.
No, not add to that, but I have another question, which is budget impact.
So I don't know, you want to comment on this?
If it moves forward, it will go to the budget committee and that would be the subject matter, appropriate place to discuss that subject matter. The budget committee.
Commissioner Alexander.
So it sounds like what my colleagues are suggesting, which I would support, would be that we kind of table this or defer it and see, and instead have a report next month focusing, based on coming out of the audit, but focusing on the situation of early literacy in the district. And I would say explicitly including dyslexia, because that's something that's come up. I mean, I want to make that distinction that there's this larger umbrella, and then there is, it sounds like, some concern around dyslexia. So I think you mentioned it before, and maybe it doesn't need to be a whole presentation, but the presentation from before, I think maybe just bringing some of that back and kind of, as Commissioner Hsu said, being clear about where are we at on that. And so, and the requests I would also make are two. One would be, can we make sure that we look at some data? So we're thinking about what's our assessment of where we're at in terms of early literacy across the board. And obviously there's a lot of variation. But secondly, where are the bright spots, right? I mean, we've been, Dr. Priestley and I have had some conversation around John Muir, and there's some piloting going on. Where are the other bright spots in the district where it seems like there's some level of success? And what have we learned from those successes? I think, just so we're all also remembering that there are pockets of success in our district, and we want to be learning from them as we move forward.
And just on, okay, and back to what we're going to do with this resolution, I just want to ask council, just in terms of process, can we table something like this and just have it be hanging out there, or should we?
Yeah, I mean, it is an
formally
action
withdraw it?
item, so it would be better to take to an actual action of yes, no, or no recommendation, so that it either moves forward or doesn't. It's kind of clear.
Unless Commissioner Alexander
Withdraws it. I mean, it could be brought back because it hasn't been voted down.
Sorry, if I withdraw it, it can be brought back?
Yeah, if a resolution is voted on and rejected, then it like takes a different percentage to bring it back within a year. There's just different rules for that. But if it hasn't been voted on, that doesn't prevent it from coming back. Like if the full board hasn't rejected it.
And just to be transparent about what I'm thinking, I just want to make sure that if there's community groups or others that really want to see a resolution moving forward, that this was a vehicle for it. So I don't just want to reject it out of hand, but it sounds like we're moving in a different direction. So if there's a way, so if my withdrawing it we could bring it back, then I'd be fine with doing that.
Okay, so
For now?
yeah, so we'll consider this resolution at the moment withdrawn by the author. Okay. All right.
But it can in the future.
It can, in a different
Yes,
form.
it could be brought back in whatever form you get to after the discussions.
And yeah, and I want to be clear to folks in the public and the community that I'm very willing to do that. And again, my purpose in stepping in the author was trying to have something that really did represent a consensus. And so I don't want to move forward with something that the community groups think isn't worthwhile either. So I just think, so that's the spirit in which it's being withdrawn. Let's move forward with this process. Let's engage. Let's see how this presentation and discussion happens in May. And if there's a desire to have some different form of a resolution, I'd be honored to put that forward in place.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I'm looking forward to the audit recommendations and next steps with dates and actual plans and data, not just words.
I think that's been made clear. Okay, so we are moving on. Dr. Priestley, we have 3 information items. You want to take them in order?
Yes, we'll be taking them in order.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for this last item. Thank you so much. All right, the first item is Universal Pre-Kindergarten and SFUSD's plans for expanding Transitional Kindergarten. And then through Dr. Priestley, who are our presenters on this item?
We have Minu Yashar, who is our Chief of Early Ed, and with her team, and she will introduce them before she begins, and they will be presenting on the Universal Pre-K and the expanding TK program.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Minu Yashar. I am the Chief of the Early Education Department here with SFUSD. We are a preschool, the 12th grade district, and the Early Ed Department is tasked with oversight of our earliest learners, as well as we manage the Title V contract, which is early learning and care, and that includes out-of-school time for TK through 5th grade students as well. And I am here with my colleagues who I will let them introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Ingrid Mesquita, and I don't work for the district. I'm the director for the San Francisco Office of Early Care and Education. It's a city and county department that funds universal preschool as well as birth to 3, and a lot of supports for expecting parents and children up to 5 years of age in San Francisco.
Good afternoon. I'm Pamela Geisler, and I work in the Early Education Department as the Budget Director and Budget and Policy Director.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I've invited Ingrid here because Universal Pre-K has implications for SFUSD and the city and California at large. And so we have a horizontal alignment and partnership with the Office of Early Care and Education. We are not the only district that provides services to 4-year-olds, and that's what this is about. So the cover page, as you can see, shows you the different areas of the presentation that we'll go over and the flow. I won't read them just for time's sake, but you can see how the flow will go. So next slide, please. So I'm going to have Ingrid go over on the left-hand side of your page, the graphic that describes universal pre-K.
Universal preschool actually has been in the works for quite some time in California. And what you see, the graphic on your left-hand side of the screen actually represents all the different types of systems that California has been working on for many decades. In San Francisco specifically, we've had a universal preschool system since 2005. With the passage of the Public Education Enrichment Fund back in 2004, it established a universal preschool for all 4-year-olds living in San Francisco, regardless of income. This was the idea, to be able to establish, hopefully, the inspiration for a public grade. Almost 20 years later, that's what we have in California. So it creates an incredible access for all 4-year-olds across the state. In San Francisco, we actually have one of the highest preschool participation rate than any other place in the state. And that's because we've started a universal preschool program many years before. So it was no surprise that back then, Mayor Newsom, now Governor Newsom, actually introduced a universal preschool system for the state of California. So we've been doing work with the district since 2005 in creating alignment, not only in standards, but also in professional development for preschool teachers across the city.
And just to let you know, Ingrid will probably need to leave in about 15 minutes, so we're going to go fast. Transitional Kindergarten is actually part of UPK, and it is the vehicle for the school districts, SFUSD, to provide free and appropriate education for 4-year-olds. By 2025, 2026, all 4-year-olds will be eligible for transitional kindergarten. But transitional kindergarten started in SFUSD 2014 and 2015. Currently, we've got 22 TK classrooms, and they serve 4-year and 9-month-olds. So the plan is that we'll be rolling back the age to younger and younger each year. TK is similarly positioned as in K. It's not a licensed program. It's a 6-hour-a-day program similar to K. Although 4 hours is the mandate in SFUSD, we provide 6 hours because we also provide 6 hours of kindergarten. So what will happen is, as those students come into our programs in public education, we will be required to provide that TK as well as after school for them, just like any other elementary grade student as well. And as Ingrid said, it is a mixed delivery system, and TK in SFUSD is that vehicle for the 4-year-olds.
Okay, so we just wanted to highlight, as they've been sharing, can you go back to the previous slide, please? That families have early learning choices, and that we're working with our community partners to create options and best serve families. So transitional kindergarten, just like kindergarten, is optional. Parents have the choice to send their children there or not, and they also have the choice to continue at their current pre-K program if that's what they choose to do. To date, we've had about a quarter of the children, both in SFUSD and throughout the city, choose to stay in pre-K even though they're TK eligible. By the end of the rollout in 25-26, we anticipate we'll serve about 1,100 to 1,500 children in SFUSD. And we wanted to note that just because a child becomes eligible for TK does not mean they lose their eligibility for preschool or Head Start programs, provided that they were eligible otherwise. And then we've been as Mina will share in a minute, partnering with and meeting with our community partners. There's about 6,000 children in San Francisco who will be eligible for transitional kindergarten in 2025. And we anticipate that some of those children will remain in their pre-K programs and CBOs, Head Starts, private providers, and the licensed and unlicensed family care situations that they're in currently. And we also anticipate that we will continue to partner with them in early learning and in aftercare. Next slide, please.
So as you can see, we have many stakeholder sessions. The state CDE is requiring all school districts to complete a UPK plan and submit it by June 30th. But in anticipation of that plan, which we certainly don't want to do in a silo or in a vacuum, we are partnering with district as well as community stakeholders to inform that plan so that then we have added iterations every time that we share with the community and go back into our work group and add to that plan. So you can see the variety of dates there, as well as the end date, June 30th, when we need to submit the plan. And then we're coming back to before that, we're coming back to a larger board session with all the commissioners to share the final plan before we submit it.
Okay, this slide just provides a summary of the TK implementation plan. We're currently in the green column on the left. And students are currently eligible for TK if they turn 5 between September 2nd and December 2nd. At this time, the adult to teacher ratio isn't specified. So we've been having one teacher in the classroom and then a transitional substitute para support the children and teachers as they begin TK. And the class size has been per CDE regulations 24. SFUSD has a class size of 22.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Transitional, the substitute you talked about for the para, what is that exactly?
So since TK started, we haven't had a lot of funding for TK specifically, but we knew that the kids were still pretty young. So for the first 6 weeks to few months, they've had a substitute para and they're just supporting the transitional process. So next year, 22-23, the birth eligibility will expand by 2 months. So it'll be September 2nd through February 2nd. And the ratio will change, so it'll be 1 to 12 students. So one teacher, and beginning next year, we'll have a full-time para in the classroom. For SFUSD, it will be a maximum of 1 to 11 students because we kept our classes at 22. The legislation right now indicates that for the next 3 years, the ratio will decrease to 1 to 10. So at that point, we'll either have to take a look at having a smaller class size of 20 or adding a second para. And then by 25-26, obviously we've been sharing, the grade will be fully implemented and we'll have a new year of free education for kids here and throughout the state. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of our current capacity and the projected capacity for next year. We currently have 24 classes, 22 gen ed and 22 SD special day classes for a capacity of 508 students. Our TK enrollment right now is pretty low at 430 as it is across the district. Pre-pandemic, we were typically over 500 students. The classes and schools are listed in the middle column, and then on the left, the blue dots indicate where those classes are currently, and then the pink stars indicate where the classes will be added next year. So next year we anticipate having 32 classes, 29 gen ed, and 3 special day classes for a capacity of 670 students. After the first round of applications, 700 placements were offered to families, but we in EPC don't anticipate that all of those placements will be accepted. And then the list of new sites is there on the left side. So we'll have 8 new sites because McLaren has had a TK. And then the last thing that I'd like to show is that on the map on the right, the red circles are currently areas in which we do not have transitional kindergarten classes. So as we move forward in following years, those are the areas that we'll look to. And actually, one last note, we don't currently offer TK transportation unless kids have an IEP. But it might be something that will change with legislation in the future.
Just clarifying about, I see the list. List is it Commodore Stockton? Is that
Yes,
Commodore?
yes.
That school is no longer Commodore Stockton. It's Gordon J. Lau, which is in Chinatown. No? Am I thinking of a different one?
We have an early education school that is called Commodore Stockton. Yeah, it's across the street. And Gordon J. Lau has a pre-K.
A little bit of a side note, I went to Commodore Stockton when it was called Commodore Stockton.
So as the students become younger and younger in the TK, they essentially are the preschool students that we're serving in pre-K. They will now be served in TK. And so that means that the curriculum that is going to be used starting next year will start to match the preschool curriculum. The state is expecting that TK classrooms use the preschool learning foundations as the guideline, the framework for that curriculum. And they're also augmenting the preschool learning foundations to include things like supporting dual language learners, anti-racist, anti-bias practices, and inclusive practices as well. The other thing that CDE will be doing is expanding the preschool learning foundations to bubble up into third grade. And that is because of the preschool to third grade initiative, which if you haven't heard, you will start to hear. And that has a lot to do with the investments in the earliest learners and aligning curriculum and instructional services to meet those needs developmentally. So with the shift to preschool learning foundations, there's a focus on whole child approaches to learning, not just content level standards, and really utilizing the environment as a way to bridge and bring in inquiry and exploration. In those TK classrooms, we will also probably have some room for rest time, for brain breaks for students as they're much younger now for a longer day. And then on the left at your leisure are curriculum that we already have in pre-K as well as in TK. And this summer we will be working with a few TK teachers to adapt that curriculum in preparation for the new school year. And then one of the changes that Pamela had mentioned is that with the new legislation starting next year, there will be 2 adults in the classroom, whereas now the mandate was just to have 1 adult, whereas SFUSD did have that 6-week transition para. The mandate is now 2 adults to the 22 kids. The criteria for a TK teacher is that they have a multi-subject credential, as well as one of the 3 bullet points related to early education experience or units. We highlighted the one about the child development teacher permit because we believe that most, if not all, TK teachers who have a multi-subject credential are going to have units that can count towards a permit, even a site supervisor permit. So we're looking into that. Given the staffing shortages that we're having, we think that will bring in more folks, and they have until August of 2023 as well to get those units if they don't have it. And then for the paraeducator, although the state says there should be another adult in the classroom, they aren't very specific on who that adult should be as of yet, but we're using the paraeducator A01 that we already have for pre-K. It has all of the criteria and experience that's needed for a developmentally appropriate classroom. But we're proposing a waiver to give paras time to meet some of those educational requirements, again, because we want to cultivate talent in our district as well. Next slide.
Okay, and then we just wanted to briefly share some details about funding. TK will be funded through average daily attendance, ADA funding, just as kindergarten and other grades are. We've had some interest from community partners, but so just wanted to reiterate that the funds can't be passed on or subcontracted to other agencies. We'll be providing transitional kindergarten here. And then the allocations per classroom will be, as we mentioned, 1 teacher, 1 para, a noon monitor, and non-personnel for supplies and field trips and time for teachers to meet, those kinds of things. Some additional funding sources that we know of at this point are the UPK planning grant, which will provide us with a little over $200,000 per each year of the rollout, and then ELO, Extended Learning Opportunity Grant, and Extended Learning Opportunity Program funding, as well as a teacher development grant. We submitted a letter of interest for that, and we're provided the opportunity to submit a full grant proposal, so we're working on that with HR currently. And then there may be an opportunity for some funding for facilities. Next slide, please.
Okay, I think this is our final slide. As we think about identifying future classrooms and this process in general, it is our goal that by the end of 2026, all elementary sites would have 1 or more TK classrooms. And considerations around that are, of course, we need to go through the school portfolio planning process, which is what we did to identify the current TK classrooms, and would want to do that as we move forward again, which is a partnership with many different departments in SFUSD, kind of scoping out what makes the most sense. Also considerations for facilities, making sure that buildings have the space and the requirements necessary for a TK classroom, which are very similar to a K classroom. Partnering with HR because it has implications for recruitment and retainment of teachers and paras. And then one of the really beneficial things about having a TK classroom is it's good for families in many ways because they can do 1 application to enroll, whereas currently now, because we don't have TK in all of our schools, families apply for TK, but then have to reapply again for elementary K through 5th. So the ramifications are 1 application, 1 streamlined process. And I think that is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the presentation. Open it up to public comment. If you'd like to speak to this item, please approach the podium. You have 1 minute.
Good evening, Commissioners. Again, Michelle Monegas from the Parent Advisory Council. Sorry, switching glasses. First, would like to appreciate the staff's work on this initiative, especially Chief Yashar's outreach to the joint advisory groups, and we can see some of our feedback reflected in the update. Thank you. Some ongoing concerns do include the staff to student ratio of 1 teacher. Even with the ratio that's coming up of two staff to 22 students is really high and unrealistic for this age group. It's many more times the number of students to educators than the licensed preschool program, which varies on age, but I think caps out at 1 to 8, I think. Or even the kindergarten licensed aftercare program ratio, which is 1 staff to 10 students. There still remain some questions around the curriculum focus. We'd love to hear more about that. We know that children, especially young children, learn best through play. What will be the emphasis, playing to learn or learning how to be a good student? And when will we see the adapted curriculum that's being worked on this summer? We also appreciate the adaptation of schedules that's mentioned to meet the needs of younger students, such as allowing a rest time, which we know is crucial. And just for the record, everybody needs brain breaks, even grown-ups. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. Commissioners, any comments or questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Hsu.
I have a question about before and after care. Sorry. Have I speak? No, still. The question is about before and after care.
Okay, so So for currently 4-year-old students who are in preschool get a 9-hour day because it's early learning and care. And it's because they're qualified for pre-K, because they work or families work or they're in school. That's the criteria to qualify for pre-K. As these students now become eligible for free public education in TK, then that does have implications for our after-school programs, right? We need to make sure that we have staff that are trained and understand how to work with young learners, as well as space for those students that are coming in. So we've identified some places next to the TKs that we know are coming out next year where we have OST and or Excel to look at and be strategic about that enrollment. The requirement is that we give families the opportunity to enroll in those after-school programs if they need it and qualify.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I would love to hear your thoughts on the point Ms. Jacques Monegas raised around curriculum and will it be a play-based curriculum?
So we currently provide that curriculum in preschool. And so it is exploratory based, small and whole group opportunities. It is driven by play, but it is an intentional play that is designed by creating an environment in which those teachers are guiding those students in that play. There are also very structured opportunities throughout the day as well. But it is based on exploration and using the environment as a space for that. So lots of project-based, play-based opportunities throughout the day.
And how is the curriculum being developed, or who's kind of doing that?
Yeah, so we have a team very similar to our CNI partners, a group of instructional coaches who develop the scope and sequence. And we have TK curriculum and we have pre-K curriculum already. So basically what we're going to be doing is bringing those two curricula together to augment what it would look like for the new TK. And we're partnering with a few TK teachers who want to work in the summer and would get compensated for that work as well.
That sounds great. And just on that point, I mean, I think we had a conversation about this briefly. Do you have thoughts on kind of our district structure with respect to that kind of having two different departments responsible for curriculum? I mean, does that partnership work? Do we need to be thinking about? I mean, it's always kind of confused me why curriculum wasn't all happening in the same place. You know what I'm saying? Like we've talked about a little bit how your department is kind of like a mini district in some ways, but are there ways, is that working, or are there recommendations you would make, especially as you're?
Commissioner Alexander, that's like a topic for a.
Yeah, if you don't want to answer that now, we could have a different conversation, but I was just thinking around the curriculum thing brought it up for me.
No, it's actually, there's a lot of alignment. Actually, Miss Levine, Lisa Levine, who was here earlier, partners with one of our coaches, Ravi Klein, around the literacy scope and sequence. And so there is a partnership and an intentional alignment between our two departments. Our departments are funded differently, and there are different compliance reporting to the state. So there's a part of that, which is why there's some two different types of department. But we partner. We're constantly partnering, and different folks are working cross-departmentally. We also did a math scope and sequence that is now, I don't know what the word is, but it's like other districts can borrow it now, which was intentionally done between CNI and early ed. So there's some great partnerships that have been happening and will continue.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and it just so I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but just raising that as always as a question that we're interested in is how do we do this work most efficiently, and really thank you for your service. Also, I just wanted to say that.
Yes, thank you as well. I have a question. So on slide 3, around the 25% of families with TK eligible children chose to remain in pre-K to do. Why? Do you have any idea why that might be? Is it maybe because of the staffing ratio? That there's more staff in a pre-K classroom than in a TK classroom? Like I'd wonder why they wouldn't want to be in the RTK.
I think there's a few reasons. Like she was saying, it's already a built-in nine-hour day for a lot of families, and they might have siblings. It might be close. I think could be geographic. I haven't heard of anyone expressing like it's a specific curriculum or structural
Or staffing.
issue, but more that it's convenience and it fits their family
Okay.
and lifestyle.
Well, I am interested in the staffing issue. I mean, it's been usually one adult, except for the sub, that helps out at the beginning. And that's just not sustainable, we know. And so as this moves forward, the funding for that extra more staffing comes from the state, right? So, okay. And then I just wanted to know if you know, and if you don't know now, maybe provide later, what are the outcome differences for students in our district that have attended and participated in TK compared with students who haven't? Like students, so Latino students who did attend and participate in TK and Latino students who did not. Over time, what are, not just academically, but social emotionally, how are there differences?
Yeah, we have a couple of research studies that we could share, none that were done since the pandemic, but there were positive outcomes both for social emotional learning and for literacy. In this case, it was they did 2 years of pre-K and TK, so as we move on, TK will become pre-K, so they're not necessarily applicable as we go forward, but we'd be happy to share those outcomes.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Provide it for the whole board, please. All right, thank you so much. If there's not any other questions or comments, we're going to move on. So thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you, Manu, for your service with the district. Our second information item is online learning program update and 2022-2023 planning regarding a virtual academy.
We have our Deputy Superintendent, Enikio Ford Morthel, who will be presenting on this topic.
Hola.
Good evening, commissioners. It will be me doing most of the presenting, and then my partner here, Joya, the Executive Director of LEAD, who will also be here to answer questions as well. Thank you for your time this afternoon. We are intending to just engage you briefly. What we hope is an exciting update. Next slide, please. So as you know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a response to California Assembly Bill 130, SFUSD offered a completely online learning experience to our families and students who requested this option for the 21-22 school year. Is it okay? Can I take my mask off? No, okay. I'm having a hard time breathing. So today we want to talk to you a little bit about some of our learnings from that option and propose to you the option of continuing to offer a virtual option for families and students beyond the 21-22 school year and outside of the AB 130 if necessary. Next slide. So just a little bit of background information. In response to the need and interest, as I said, and in response to Assembly Bill 130, we offered 3 options. Our first option was an online learning program that was specifically for our students in TK through 8th grade. And it was a completely online program where our students kept their school of record, if you will, meaning they were still enrolled in their quote unquote home school, but they attended school online with another teacher. These students were clustered by grade span and met every single day of their virtual program year or time. And they met with the same teacher and same cohort of students. They had a combination of both synchronous, live and live and asynchronous, meaning independent daily work. Again, that was for our students in grades TK through 8th. For our students in secondary schools, we leveraged an existing alternative program through Independence High School. And similarly to our OLP program, these students engaged in learning completely virtually with a combination of synchronous or live or asynchronous independent work. And then finally, we offered an additional program called our On-Demand Learning Program, or ODLP. And this was for our families who didn't necessarily have any issues in terms of being exposed or having risk of exposure, didn't meet any CDC qualifications of being at risk, but families had perhaps some home situations or concerns with sending their students in person. And so for these students, they were also engaged in an online option. However, the majority of their work was asynchronous or independent. They would meet with a teacher on occasion throughout the week for a maximum of about an hour. So those are our programs that we offered for the fall 21-22 school year. And our response to those programs have been great. And our enrollment in those programs, even with the various variants and different changes, has been rather consistent. From that, we get the sense that even as things change with our current environment and the pandemic, we might have a number of families and students for whom an online option is the best option, an option of choice. And so early on, we started talking about the possibility of continuing this option even beyond state mandate and legislation. We also see it as an opportunity to expand our portfolio, to provide a more diverse portfolio of school options to our families. And what we know about students is that we have a number of different learning styles and types. And for some, a virtual option is the best option. So with that, we are proposing that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just give some numbers on the enrollment? Because you mentioned enrollment is strong.
Yes. So if you don't mind, Commissioner Shu, as I'm going, I'll have Joya pull that up for me. I don't have that at hand, but we can definitely have it before the presentation. I'm having a really hard time breathing, you all, so I'm going to pull this right here. Of course, I wore the clingiest mask. It's cute though. So next slide, please. So we started earlier on just talking about just the possibility of offering an online option, again, beyond AB 130 and no longer just in response to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So we've learned a lot in that, and we are very transparent that our shift to an online option was in response to a crisis. It's something that we didn't strategically plan for, and there was a lot of hiccups, if you will, and learning along the way. And we have continued to engage in continuous improvement and learning with this, but we think that we've learned quite a bit. We've also done a lot of research and listening and learning to other districts who have online options. And so we think we're in a position to actually provide a more thoughtful virtual experience. This slide just kind of highlights some of the key insights from our virtual model, and I'm not going to read them all, but we've actually done a lot of thinking around what elements of the program of an online option we want to adopt or really kind of keep. What are some elements that we need to adapt or change? And then what are some things that we need to just stop doing altogether and abandon and possibly take on some new models? And again, the intent of this slide is not to go through each bullet, but to really let you all know that we've been really thinking about this and know that there's a lot of a ramp up and room for improvement as we move to a virtual option. But we still think this might be a really good and make sense option for many of our students and families. Next slide. So here's the proposal. One more click, please. So we are offering that SFUSD move from just having a virtual program option to actually opening, if you will, in quotation marks, a virtual academy. Again, remember that for our secondary students, we already have an existing alternative option through Independence High School. And so students who are needing a virtual option can maybe access that option through Independence. Primarily, though, we're thinking about opening this virtual academy for our students in grades TK through 8. We're thinking we would actually model this program not just on our own learning, but some of the best online learning and best practices that we have to date, not just our own, but again, engaging with our research partners as well as other districts who have done this work before. We are doing a lot of consideration around how do we staff and align this program model to our physical schools. And so just a distinction is that, again, as we pivoted to online learning, we just were like, oh, they need some teachers, need a clerk. At some point, we figured out they need an AP, but we didn't have the option or the time to really as thoughtfully think about the staffing as we know that the program deserves. So for this virtual academy option, we would do just that, making sure at the very minimum it has what our existing kind of or brick and mortar schools have, as well as thinking about what staffing is unique to a virtual academy. And then finally, we know we have to do a lot of thinking and planning around the actual enrollment of this virtual program. I think just for your benefit, Commissioner Shu, for our online learning program to date, we have basically had our students kind of stay as a student at their quote unquote home school. So if I was a student at Charles Drew Elementary School. I still am on the record, if you will, at Charles Drew, but I engage in my learning virtually through this online learning teacher. And at any point, if I decided that I wanted to go back, or if my family thought it was best for me to go back in person, the school would have 5 days to return me back to Charles Drew. With this option, we are still learning more about what the legislation might require us to do, but our thinking is that this is now your school. So if you are a member of this virtual academy, you no longer attend Charles Drew, you attend SFUSD Virtual Academy. However, we do know the circumstances continue to change, so if a family or student needed to go back to a school, we would still, if possible, have that cushion in place, but you wouldn't necessarily go back to a quote-unquote school of record. So that's a really important distinction, is that this is now a school that students attend with a CDE code. So did I miss anything, Joy? Okay. The other thing to share, next slide, is that I spoke about our on-demand learning program. And again, those were for families who, for a variety of reasons, didn't feel it was safe for their students to attend school in person for a short amount of time, a long amount of time, right? And so we continue to have that option. As we move into this virtual academy, that would be the online learning program for our students in TK8. The on-demand learning program would no longer exist. We would, though, continue to offer a short-term independent study for families who had issues that required them to be away from school in person for any long period of time. And so the biggest change, I would say, is moving the online model from a program to an actual school, no longer offering the on-demand learning program, but keeping the independent study program and keeping the secondary option for students to engage virtually from independent high school. Next slide. You have something to say?
I wanted to interject, I believe 14 days is the correct number.
Thank you, sorry, yes, on that slide, on slide that one, there was a typo, so thank you for calling that out, Dr. Priestley. It says no longer than 15 days, it's actually no longer than 14 days.
Can I just clarify? I think it's me every time I turn one on.
It might be yours, yeah.
No problem, no problem. Just this OLP and ODLP, I see the differences being ODLP being TK through 12 and the other one is just TK through 8. Is that the only, I mean, other than this, what was the COVID related stuff and what was not, or both are? I'm a little confused.
So thank you for pulling me back. So I used to say it so many times that I stopped saying it. The online learning program, the OLP, was for students who qualified for a CDC recognized diagnosis or had a contraindication, which means they got that first vaccination and maybe had a response to a reaction to it, and so they couldn't get the other one. And so the difference between OLP and ODLP was really more so that, how did you get into, or how did you qualify for the program? And then of course there was much more interaction with a live instructor, a consistent cohort of students, et cetera. The OLP was for students who did not meet those CDC required qualifications and did not have a contraindication, but their families for one reason or another felt it was not safe for them to be in person in school. So that's the distinction. The ODLP was for students in grades kindergarten all the way through 12. The OLP was for students TK8, and then the Independence High School was the virtual option for students 9 through 12. Did I answer your question?
The OLP is the one that you qualify for CDC exception.
Yes.
Okay.
So the next steps, is that where we're at?
Yes, we're on the next steps. So at this point, we've began an application process for a new CDS code. So for it to be a school versus a program, it needs a CDS code. And we are planning and hoping to bring this in front of the whole board on April 26th. I would say for the CDS request, we are in the first stage. So we submitted the request, and now we're trying to compile the required document to have them actually review and approve that request. One of those requirements is this: talk to you about it. And then also talk to the whole board about it. So that's where we are in terms of that part of the phases, with the hope that the board will be able to take action on the item. And we can work with our labor partners to think about human resources and hiring and things like that. The other thing is that we have to hire folks. So the other next step, if this is approved, is to, again, work with our labor department, but really think about what does staffing look like and how do we identify staff. Another distinction is that for both the OLP and ODLP, in many cases, there were existing SFUSD classroom teachers or staff who were moved over to teach the program. And that worked in some ways and didn't work in a lot of ways. And so now thinking about how do we make it clear this is not just for folks who couldn't report to in-person teaching, but actually this is a full-time job and this is what you would do, be a virtual teacher. So staffing is the next step. And then we want to collaborate, of course, with our partners in EPC to think about what does enrollment look like for this school. If we're talking about doing this for the 22-23 school year and enrollment has already started, what does that look like for a family if this is approved to request that virtual option? What that look for transfers and things like that. So those are the three kind of next steps that are immediate for us. Of course, the bigger next steps are actually designing a full-on virtual academy and making sure we're able to provide our students a rigorous program and our families ways to actually participate in this model. And that was it.
All right, thank you. If you'd like to comment on this item, please approach the podium. Up 1 minute.
Thank you, Commissioners. Michelle Jacques Monegas again with the PAC. I'll first speak as a parent advocate, and I'm really excited to hear about this virtual academy and to really be intentional about creating an online learning program that we know will meet our students' needs. Many of us have been asking sort of almost for the past 2 years, sort of shortly after the pandemic hit, what is the district's backup plan for any kind of emergency, whether it's a COVID surge or wildfire smoke or, heaven forbid, an earthquake? We live in San Francisco. And I can see something like this having the potential to be a kind of program that could easily be picked up and replicated and perhaps support students in a situation like that. So there's hope. And then I'll speak as a parent again of 2 former SFUSD students who struggled with mental health issues that greatly inhibited their ability to participate in regular traditional school models, especially middle and high school. And I wish we'd had something like this for them, so thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Alex.
I had 2 questions. One was, and these are both about data, do we have any outcome data from this year that would be useful in terms of the extent to which students have been able to succeed in the online programs?
So the students in this program take the LPAC, will be taking the SBAC and do the benchmark assessments. But in all transparency, we've had a really challenging time actually facilitating assessments in this virtual program model. A little bit of that, I think, is, we didn't necessarily have as much time to plan for how do you do that and get the teachers ready, et cetera. I think the other part of it is that we were talking about this today in a meeting, that we really are going to have to help shift the mindset and the expectations of this model so that it's no longer just, I didn't feel like my kid was safe to go to school, but this is your school. And so how do we make sure that our families and our students understand the expectations around participation and engagement and attendance, quote unquote, and how do we also make sure our teachers are ready to support that lift? And so at this point, I would say our data is all over the place. We were just talking to Dr. Khanna, who was like 50% participation rate, if not lower, in some of the assessments. So that's something we're gonna have to plan for, to have some strong data. We're also honest just about the level of rigor in the program. It's definitely improved, Commissioner Alexander, but I'm gonna just always keep it real with you that that is something that we need to think about as we talk about a virtual school. What is different about ways to engage students? What is different in terms of the curriculum, just talking about the literacy and engaging students in language arts? And so that's all a part of it, and with the hope of having more consistent data and, of course, better outcomes.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And then my other data question was, I think I know that we don't have this yet, but I just want to ask anyway. We don't have any data, do we, on students leaving SFUSD and to what extent they went to other virtual options? 'Cause I've just heard anecdotally that actually is somewhat common, that some people have left the district because they moved out of the city, some people have left because they've gone to private schools, but then there's a chunk of these new online programs that students have joined. And so I'm just curious, because this could be a way to kind of recapture some of that enrollment.
I don't know that we have that data. I'm not sure if you've.
We don't have anything formal, but I agree. We have heard the anecdotal comments from families who are asking for their transcripts so that they could apply into an outside program.
And we've definitely thought about this. I didn't say this in the presentation, but again, providing a diverse portfolio of schools is another way to attract and keep families and address some of the attendance decline that we know enrollment decline that we know that we're seeing. We also have those numbers for you, Commissioner Shu.
So over time, the online learning program, OLP, has stayed fairly consistent. There's 385 students last fall, and we're at 317 at this point. And then the ODLP is really what's fluctuated incredibly. I only have the numbers from December, which it was at 500, and now we're down to 389. But at one point in the fall, when we were first beginning the program, there was over 1,500 students that had enrolled on the ODLP only, and now we're down to 500. So that was an incredible range.
I think just to add to that, we anticipate that the enrollment for the OLP, the online learning program, would have been higher, but we had a very strict criteria for enrollment because staffing was always a challenge. And so we anticipate that if we did make this something that was well-known and communicated, we might actually see more families interested in this option.
How big, did you have an idea of how big the virtual academy might be?
Right now, we're planning for 2 classes per grade level, and that's kind of what we have as like a draft budget. TK would only have 1 class per grade level, and then 6th through 8th grade would be 4 cohorts, not just 3, in order to have single subject teachers for each of the core content areas.
And how many for Independence High School? While you're looking at that, the 2 buckets of OLP and ODLP, do you have a sense of the breakdown of age range, whether it's elementary school kids or middle school kids versus high school kids?
There was significantly more elementary age students that had applied for these programs than the secondary. I would say an estimate for the students that have been in and out of Independence High School through this program is probably around 50 students.
So the OLP and ODLP numbers are mostly elementary school students, right?
Correct.
Well, and I was just going to make sure that Commissioner Shu knows, I mean, Independence is an existing program too with other enrollment. So it's kind of, it was both, right? Yeah.
I do have something else. So it sounds like the virtual academy perhaps is an option for some parents who choose to do homeschooling. I actually did homeschooling for my son in 7th grade. And it was, and I explored a lot of different online options. So is that the intention also, to maybe attract some of those families who choose to do homeschooling or go to the other programs? And are we, that's one question. Secondly is the curriculum. Are we making our own? Are we adapting? Or what do we do with that?
So let's say that, yes, that's part of the strategy, right, around the homeschooling. As we thought about it, we weren't saying like, oh, this is for the students, the families who want to homeschool. We definitely appreciate that there are some families who are considering homeschool for lots of different options for whom this will be a great choice. So that's definitely one of the groups that we're trying to capture. I would say in terms of the curriculum, we started making our own curriculum in the beginning, again, just because of the fast pivot that we had to make. And since then, we've partnered, particularly for our secondary students, and I'm going to forget the name, Edgenuity, and one other partner that actually does online learning and had materials already. So I think that as we think about having an actual virtual school, a part of that conversation or that design would be where we get the curriculum from and what it would be. But we're also really mindful to make sure that if we were to partner with anyone around the curriculum, we want there to be some very tight alignment between what we're doing and what students are getting in our brick and mortar school, and what they're getting in the virtual school. Maybe not the same mode of teaching and communication for lots of obvious reasons, but the content itself should stay as consistent and aligned as possible as we move forward towards more instructional coherence. But we also want our students to be able to move in and out, well, not in and out. We want them to, if they were to come out of the virtual school and go to a traditional brick and mortar school, we want there to be that easy transition as much as possible, so.
Just have a couple questions myself. One is the demographics of the students that attend both those programs. Do we have that at hand? If you don't, you can just forward it to the board at a later date. That'd be great. I've just heard anecdotally from folks who work in it. And then on the fifth slide around key insights from SFUSD, the abandoned column or box, the last bullet is duplicating the student count causes us to pay for more teachers than needed. I'm pulling that out because I'm wondering about the fiscal viability moving forward. It sounds like we're overstaffed. Is that accurate to say for the programs right now? And you're identifying this as part of that overstaffing is because it's duplicating. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
And I'm happy to let Joya jump in, but one of the things again is that for this model, for the virtual program, we're still holding a student seat at their quote unquote home school and in that classroom, right? And so a teacher, I'm still on that teacher's roster. So I might be a teacher who has 5 students participating in the online learning program, and those 5 seats are still in my classroom empty, and the district or my principal is not allowed to put anyone else in that seat. And so in that way, it's not as cost efficient because I'm holding spots for students that I'm also paying for to go into this online learning program with the teacher that we're paying a salary for as well.
That is correct. And then because we were had such a wide variety at the beginning, right now we have some classes where the teacher is only responsible for 6 students. And so there's multiple teachers where that is the case.
Obviously, that's not okay.
Yeah. And so as we are learning, right, through this year, we want to make a recommendation that aligns with our current staffing to student ratios, which is 22 at the lower grades and then 33 at the secondary space.
And then moving forward, we wouldn't hold open those seats. That's just not going to happen. Okay, great.
And again, we're still getting more clear guidance around AB 130 and what it will require. And there's some question marks if they're going to still require that with the request that we have to move students back somewhere in 5 days.
All right, unless there's no other questions. Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The last item under information is update on implementation of resolution number 1312-10A4, establishment of a safe and supportive schools policy in the San Francisco Unified School District. And just as you prepare to present this, I noticed that there's a number of acronyms in this report that you might want to spell out for us and the public.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. We have Chief Melee Lau Smith, and she'll introduce who's with her team in this Safe and Supportive Schools presentation.
Thank you. Welcome. I just that there's a number of acronyms that I'd like you to just spell them out for us. Thank you. And also you're going to need to press the button for your microphone.
There it goes, green. Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to present to the Curriculum Committee. I believe we will also be making a similar presentation to the full board at the end of April as part of the 2 annual updates for the Safe and Supportive Resolution. My name is Melee Lau Smith, and I'm with the Student and Family Services Division. And what I wanted to do today was sort of provide an overview of the resolution itself and the status of the actions as part of this resolution, which I believe was adopted by the board in February 2014. So can we go to the next slide, please? So as you can see, the resolution actions, those are taken directly from the Safe and Supportive Schools policy. And then you can see on the other side, the right side of the columns is what we have done. So the first part, which was a very large community stakeholder process and a long process, was developing the tiered behavioral discipline matrix, which is now embedded in the board policy 5144, and it is also part of the student family handbook. At the same time, we also updated the board policy to ensure that there was no suspension or expulsion solely on the basis of disruption and defiance. At the time that this policy was passed, that was also a policy that was passed statewide. And so no longer, since 2014, can schools suspend or expel a student solely on the basis of disruption or defiance. The other part was that we really wanted to look at ensuring that restorative practices and positive behavior intervention supports, which included training and professional development, would be available to all teachers and educators throughout the district. This has not happened. It has been made available. However, the funding for these types of trainings has sort of been up and down. Initially, there was funding through the SACE, and you're going to have to help me, Deputy Superintendent Ford Marthel. CEIS, what does it stand for? We just talked about it this afternoon. Okay, I can't remember. These funds, so these funds, what happens is when a school district is found disproportionate and it's discipline for special education students, either discipline or even referral to special education services, a certain portion of these funds can go towards general education supports. So from about 2016 to about 2020, there was about $1 million in these funds that were dedicated towards professional development opportunities for restorative practices and positive behavior intervention supports. Those funds sunsetted on June 30th, 2020, and these funds are now being used for literacy work that we've just started in the district. So that funding went away, and those staffing positions and the support for those fundings also went away. You go to the next slide, please. Oh, SACE, Coordinated Early Intervention Services. So that's what that stands for. Go to the next. Oh, yeah, you did already. Okay, and part of the resolution asks for schools to develop a school-based team to plan and guide the implementation efforts. Schools were never provided specific funding to establish a school-wide team. So what schools did was sort of rely on the existing teams that they already had in place. And some of them, at many of our schools, the name of this team could be called something different. Could be the Culture and Climate Team, the climate team, the discipline team, the instructional leadership team. It looks different at different schools, but in the absence of funding, schools were creative to see where this work could land. The other work was each school would establish sort of behavior expectations that were specific to a school. And this work really happened in earnest, I would say, probably in 15, 16, and 16 and 17. And I would say that many, if not all, schools have developed them. So like if you go to a school and say, maybe you can remember from Cleveland what it was, there were usually
safe, responsible, and there was one other term.
right. So there were usually 3 of them, you know, however, and they were always like, what do you do positively versus don't run in the hallways? It was be safe and respectful in the hallways or that type of thing. So it was really focused on positive behaviors.
It was just common messaging throughout the school,
Exactly.
in the classroom, in the common areas,
Exactly.
in the playground.
So I would say that when you walk around our schools today, you will often see the different signs. And so this was a school-wide process where students were part of it and families were part of it. And that's the idea, is to create these behavior expectations together. The another part was to integrate restorative practices and school-wide positive behavior intervention services with response to intervention. This is work that is to address the disproportionality in the special education referrals. This is work that continues today, and this is work that is part of what the SACE plan is focusing on. And then again, there was really wanting schools to consistently spend time building trusting relationships among their communities. And there was a family partnership model that was developed based on student and family input. It was like a year-long process of developing this model, and it's really grounded in partnership with families and students. Again, there wasn't dedicated funding to push this out to all schools, but there has been consistent availability of training for schools that participated in it. Go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that just to dig in a little bit more deeply on what the 1 million in SACE fundings, and that was annual for about 5 years. It provided coaching hours, so there were staff that were hired as restorative practices coaches or culture and climate coaches, and they could go to a school and support the administration of what was called the tiered fatality inventory. And that is a tool that you would complete in the fall. You would do an assessment of how well we were implementing the different positive behavior intervention systems with what fidelity and identify areas of improvement. And then you would do the inventory again in the spring. And this was the one tool that would measure if you were about 85% implementing all of the different interventions, then we should start having an impact on suspensions or expulsions and referrals to special education. The funding also provided substitutes. That's a really big thing that needs to happen in our district to allow school site staff to attend trainings, is to have a substitute to attend these different trainings that were offered. One of the challenges with this is also that we have a limited number of substitutes, and there are times when we had to, there were, I guess I would call blackout dates for certain types of training, so you'd have to work around the availability of substitutes to provide the trainings. The other thing it provided was extended hours for school staff who opted in to attend safety care trainings, and that is the training to for verbal and physical de-escalation techniques. And those trainings were offered monthly, and the training was actually a 1-week training, so it was a significant investment of time. Those trainings are now offered through the Special Education Services Department. Go to the next slide, please. This was in the spring of 2019. The Board of Education, the commissioners requested that we give an idea of like what would it cost to have a climate team lead at our tier 1-3 schools at that time, and then maybe give a stipend, which is just, it's not funding an actual person, but giving a person at the school site who agrees to be part of this team a stipend for being part of that team. So we provided this estimate, though we were not able to, within the budget constraints and resources and the competing resources, be able to allocate these funds for it. But I did want to share that again, because that has come up a couple of times. And next slide. So what we were able to do in the fall of 2019 was, for the first time, we were able to implement baseline data on what was happening at school sites around restorative practices. We had spent about a year, 2018, 2019, sort of pausing and looking at the different interventions and what was the information we had. So we were able to determine in the fall of 2019 that all schools had a climate team, and we were engaged in a year-long professional learning community around it. And most of the teams had members who were trained in restorative practices. There were very few teams that the members weren't trained. And again, this was in the fall, so they could have taken the training through that school year. This was a baseline. We had a...
Sorry, can I just ask clarifying on this? Is this percentages of all schools? So like, you know what I'm saying? Like
every school that had a climate team, and I think they were almost all, I'd have to go back and look at the data to make sure that it is all schools. So I can get back to you on that.
Essentially, but these percentages on these pages are like of all schools, basically, more or less?
Yes,
okay,
pretty much. And then you could see on the other one, the restorative practice training and implementation, which teams, like we had, which was really exciting. Like some team members have attended the training and delivered the 1 hour RP. So again, we were moving towards a training of the trainer model because we did not have the funding we had to provide trainings at school sites. So we had 24% is pretty good if you're looking in when the school just started, that people attended a training and then went back and did their training with their staff. You can go to the next slide, please. The same thing we did was sort of look at proactive classroom community building circles. That's really a cornerstone of restorative practices, because really the first part of restorative practice is to build a community so that when harm is done, you have a community to restore. So really spending a lot of time with school staff on how do you have classroom circles in your classroom that don't have to be that are about building community, not about restoring harm, so that when something happens, you can have what are called impromptu restorative conversations. And those are some of the most critical skills to have, is those impromptu restorative conversations, because often, as we were talking earlier about sort of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, these are very much tier 1 interventions because they can prevent harm from being done if you're developing all of these proactive community building practices. And so you can see that we had some, 80% of the teachers had been trained. Some were practicing, but not practicing consistently. So this just was giving us this was the first time we had a picture of what was happening with restorative practices across the district. Go to the next slide. I'm sorry, they're a little out of order. Can I ask you to go to the next slide, and then I'm going to come back to this one. Okay, so then that was the fall of 2019, and then we all know what happened in the spring of 2020. We had the COVID school closures on March 16th, 2020. Going into, we were also, that was the last year, that spring, that we had that SACE funding. So the following year, there was about a $4.2 million cut to the division. And so we lost a lot of the staff who were supporting restorative practices. The board did pass in the summer of 2020 as part of a response to the pandemic, the trauma-informed coordinated care approach, which included restorative practices. So we started pivoting some of the restorative practices around a coordinated care approach. We were in distance learning for almost a year. And during that time, we also really, as a district, recommitted to anti-racist practices and spent some time across all of our divisions and departments doing what we called interrogating our programs and practices in anti-racist practices. And we did some shifts and changes to some of the work in the restorative practices curriculum, because it was identified as having some white supremacist characteristics, specifically paternalism, and I'm the only way, and we can share those audits with you. So we did that during the pandemic. And then can you go back to the slide that I asked you to skip? So when we came out of return to in-person learning in the spring of 2021, and then more deeply into the fall of 2021, we developed what is called the Coordinated Care Team Co-Leads Implementation Guide. Like the family partnership model, it was also developed in collaboration with a family advisory body. We brought together students and families to identify with them what would coordinated care approach look like at our school districts. We provided this in the Admin Institute to school site leaders. There were nuts and bolts trainings in the fall of 21. That's September 21st and September 23rd, not years. We created restorative practices, planning guides and resources, trainings on de-escalation. But because we didn't have dedicated funding, all of these trainings were provided either through what we call the independent learning modules that folks complete, and also virtual training. So that is sort of a little bit of a story of where we are today. And I think I'm turning it over to Devin to talk about the data that we can share with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Melly. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be running through some numbers for attendance and chronic absenteeism and suspensions, comparing this most recent fall to ones before. And before I get started, I should say I'm Devin Corrigan. I'm the supervisor of analytics in the Research Planning and Assessment Department. I work for Dr. Khanna. And with that, I think we can jump in and go to the next slide, please. So I'll say off the bat, I know there's a lot happening on this slide here, which is true of most of our slides. So I'll try to orient you and always point you towards where you can find even more information should you want it. So the first couple of things I want to say, can you hear me okay? These are unmatched students, so we're not talking about a cohort of students that we're following over time, but rather snapshots of students taken at the times that I'm going to talk about. I also wanted to mention that all these slides here are going to have a link at the top. If you click the link, it'll take you to a PDF with many, many, many more numbers than you'll see on these slides. We already fit in a lot here, and we don't want to try to fit in too much and have it just be incomprehensible. So if you want to see the whole table and really roll your sleeves up and get into the full data, you can click through at the blue link on the top, and I would encourage you to do that. So we're going to talk about a couple of different metrics when we look at attendance and absenteeism. So I also want to point out that when we talk about average attendance, talking about daily attendance, the number of days attended over number of days enrolled as a fraction, and then we've got average excused absence, which is the same thing but for excused, unexcused, same but for unexcused. And percent chronically absent, as I'm sure everyone knows, it's 10% is our cutoff. So just quite different. I want to point that out. The numbers look very different looking at the column for average attendance versus the column for percent chronically absent. Average attendance is a continuous variable going, from 0 to 100, whereas you would have this binary category for percent chronically absent, and that's why the numbers look quite different. So just a quick orientation there. And then what I want to say in terms of the observations is that comparing fall 2019 to fall 2021, you'll notice that there's a fall missing. And that's, of course, because that was when we were engaged fully in distance learning. But we do have this fall 2019 as a comparison semester to this most recent semester, which is, of course, fall 2021-22, which you see on the right there. So with that orientation for you, really what we want to say is that we're seeing that the average attendance rates have decreased by about 2% overall, and we can see that the younger grades, TK through 5 and 6 through 8, are pulling that average down. And even if it's 2 overall, we see bigger decreases at those grade levels. Similarly, for average excused absence rates, we're seeing that they've doubled in that time, and also being pulled by the same grades, TK through 5 and 6 through 8. For chronic absenteeism, we've seen about an 8% increase overall, and we see very large increases at TK through 5 and 6 through 8, particularly in the elementary grades. As always, when our paper presents data, we want to show you trend data, we want to show you subgroup data. And so, while we talk about these overall trends and they're important, we also really want to focus in on what we see in terms of gaps, and we do see gaps here. So we've seen that gaps have widened for average attendance, average excused absence, and chronic absenteeism, so across all those different metrics. And of particular concern, we're seeing that very high chronically absent rates for African American students, Latinx students, and Pacific Islander student groups. So that's mirroring trends that we're seeing across the state, but that we are seeing, really some concerning data in terms of widening gaps, and did want to point that out. I'll again point you towards the link there at the top for more.
Sorry, can I just also add that one of the things about the fall of 2021 that we haven't really been able to dig in is the impact of quarantining on absentee rates, either excused or unexcused, how well we manage that. And that was going to disproportionately impact the lower grades because the vaccine was not available until December for 5 through 11-year-olds. So it will be interesting to see if some of that improves, since we had starting in January and February, we had more elementary students vaccinated, which means you did not have to quarantine. And we have launched group tracing at the end of March, which means no students have to quarantine. So we're able to keep students in school more. So that is also something that the pandemic has also impacted. when we return to school.
Sorry, are we seeing upticks in the monthly data since like in the spring?
I'm sorry, monthly upticks for what? Sorry.
Well, I'm wondering what you were just saying, if that's the case. Like, are
Oh.
we seeing increases in attendance in the spring compared to the fall?
That's what we hope to see. I mean, I don't think we've run the data, but because the fall students were being quarantined due to a positive case, we would have had more absences, excused absences, than we should have in the spring because students aren't being quarantined.
No, I totally understand. That was what I was wondering. Like, we don't have data from the spring yet?
We have
From
preliminary
this
data.
spring.
Yeah, like a monthly, like February or.
I actually just saw a preliminary report this morning.
Yeah,
So,
I'm just curious.
yeah, what I've seen is that there's a predictable drop in January, like you'd expect given what was happening with Omicron. We saw a really big hit to the average attendance rate overall, and it climbed back up pretty quickly. You know, within 3 to 4 weeks, it was kind of back where it was before in December. So I can show the chart, it's coming soon enough, but basically it dips the attendance rate and then it slowly climbs back up.
But it's still
below.
lower. It's still
Yes.
comparable to these numbers rather
That's
than
right.
back. Okay.
That's right.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to confuse things. I also think post-group tracing, which was March 24th, where nobody is quarantined for a positive, we hopefully will see an increase from that.
I think it would be helpful if we had other demographic groups in here. So white, Asian, just because then you can see some comparative, you can see, like, for example, all things being equal, if people were quarantining during January, were they quarantining across the board? And so would that be reflected in the numbers? So if you have those numbers, maybe you can provide those later so that we can see the difference between the different demographic groups that are not presented here.
There's a couple things to say there. One is that certainly for all the attendance data, we can provide all that information, and that's something that you would get by clicking through at the link. At the top, you would see all the groups. In fact, that squiggly line in the middle is meant to represent that there's a lot more to list there, but we wanted to go easy on your eyes. So that's all there if you click through. And as far as your question more specifically about quarantining, Melly may be able to speak more to this, but I know that there's some data collected about why someone might not be in school that's pandemic related, but I haven't seen any that we have reliable data to report, you know, this student was quarantining and this student was sick with COVID, as opposed to the more sort of high level data that we've always collected about an excused absence. So I'm not sure we can get into that level of detail reliably, but certainly with the classic metrics of average attendance, chronic absenteeism, we break those down by every group you could think of just about.
I have a question. So this is saying that the pandemic has really impacted the absenteeism or attendance, and is mostly the lower elementary and middle school. However, my sons are at Galileo High School. The attendance there is a mess. I'm not going to mince words. And in addition to that, just the tracking is always wrong. I have students and parents always complaining that they were there, but then they were marked absent. So just numerous cases like it. But in addition, there's a group of students who do not go to class. They're wandering around the halls all day. Are they absent? Are they there? Like, how are these numbers reflected in here at all, if at all? Yeah, so it's two different.
I might have the most high school experience here. Yeah, that last question, typically a high school student who's not in class would be marked absent for that period. Now, if they went to one class or more, then they would be marked present for average daily attendance purposes. But if they didn't, so if they went to one class, because the average attendance is basically ADA, right? Whereas like the under 90% at a high school level usually reflects the percentage of actual class time. Am I getting this right? That's like my understanding.
It's all daily attendance.
Oh, it's all daily attendance.
Yeah, so for average attendance, it's the daily attendance. So it's your days attended divided by your days enrolled.
Okay.
And it's an average because it's averaged for all of whatever group
Right.
we're talking about. So if it's district total,
so-
we're averaging that for everybody.
So in high school, because this is also for like attendance reporting to the state, in high school, if you're present in one class, you're considered present for average daily attendance. So if a kid is there, they go to one class and they spend the rest of the day wandering in the halls, I don't know, that could be why these numbers aren't any lower, because they would be regarded as present. It's a little different than elementary, whereas like there's typically just one attendance taker, right? Because it's one teacher. So any present is a present at high school, typically.
Yeah, for ADA purposes.
There also is a way to record it. Most high schools would be looking at that, and there's reports like a skipped class report and all. I mean, so on an internal basis, schools look at that, but in terms of attendance reporting, it would be considered present.
Thank you. And I don't want to take up more time here, but I would like to meet with, is it Devin or someone to understand this a little more?
Of course. So there's nothing else on this one. I think we can keep going. We're going to go into suspensions now, please. So this is an overall snapshot of suspensions. It's suspension rate, so it's suspensions per 100 students as of the last slide, and all others to come. I would point you towards the link in the title to see this in more detail, but this at least gives you a quick snapshot, a quick look, and also point you toward the definition there at the bottom. So what we're seeing overall here is what we want to see. You know, with the directionality, we're seeing fewer suspensions than there were. Of course, you'll notice the zeros in the middle column for each of the categories here: elementary, middle, high school, and overall. The zeros that's fall 2020, when we were all in distance learning. But comparing fall 2019, that should say 2019 in the title, my apologies. 2019 to 2021, we do see a drop overall for each of these groups. Next slide, please. Of course, that's never the whole story. And as I said a few moments ago, we always want to be looking at what gaps might exist. And so here we have elementary, middle, and high school groups represented in each of these visualizations, and then all these different subgroups. When you mentioned the acronyms earlier, I thought this might be one of the slides you were talking about. It is chock full of them. There is a guide there at the bottom to help with that, but this gets to that issue I was talking about earlier, where we want to pack as much as we can into a slide, and then it quickly gets very, very busy. So the link again at the top would take you to more detailed data, but I can say at least pointing you towards some salient pieces in this particular slide, even as we see numbers down overall, which again is what we want to see in terms of the directionality here. We want to see the suspension rate going down. We see that in elementary, middle, and high. But even in middle and high, where we see more of a drop, we still see not only some subgroups where the suspension rate is higher than the average, but we also see that there were some groups for whom the suspension rate actually did go up a bit. We see that for African American students and Pacific Islander students, for example. So I did want to point out that those are gaps that we're focused on. When we look at this data, again, just sort of hammering away on this point here, we're always interested in looking at data over time, looking at these trends and breaking it down by subgroups and looking for these types of gaps. So that's really the biggest takeaway from this slide, is looking at where we've got those bars that are higher than the overall ones on the far left of this slide. So I know we've got a lot to get through, and I'll pause there, but happy to answer any questions about this as well.
Well, I'll ask, is there any, I mean, I've noticed the numbers, you mentioned Pacific Islander students and the suspensions, and the Samoan students in terms of there's a dramatic decline in attendance for Samoan students. What's our sense from talking with folks in the community as to what's going on there and what can be done about it?
So you're looking again at slide 11, the attendance, or are you looking at the slide?
So-
that's on the screen?
Back to attendance.
Yeah, I was saying attendance and suspension. So there's an increase in suspensions for Pacific Islander students at middle school and slightly at high school, although it's small numbers. But more so the attendance. The attendance is also really dramatic. I noticed for Samoan students in particular, the attendance drop was dramatic.
So what I would say, and I definitely offer my colleagues to jump in, but specific to our Samoan Pacific Island students, but also with inclusive of our African American students, our students with IEPs and our language learners, there are these trends that are similar, right, in terms of attendance and suspension. And a part of it that we've gathered, a little bit of it is just like it makes sense, but we've also spoken and heard the feedback from families and students. And so for attendance is, do I feel welcome and a sense of belonging in school? For attendance is, do I feel engaged? Do I see myself reflected in the curriculum? And do I feel like my voice and my input and my ideas matter? And that is both in speaking to students and families about attendance, but also in speaking with our students who are part of, for example, our ethnic studies classes, et cetera. We have high numbers of students who are, students who identify as students of color, who tell us the difference in terms of their experience and who have actually said, and so I just don't go to those classes. And so that's a little anecdotal, don't quote me on that is the reason, but that is for sure some of the trends we're seeing in terms of the reason. Similarly for suspensions, I was writing down, and for my slides, that we have to address mindset. And so there is a difference in oftentimes how a teacher or staff member might respond to a certain behavior from kids, depending on what they look like, what they sound like, and where they're from, right? And so I was actually going to keep it to myself, but even looking at that elementary school suspension slide, and when we saw that the numbers had gone down, I wanted to distinguish that just because we are not sending kids home does not mean that we're not sending kids out of school. And so there's a lot of this resolution and this work that doesn't speak to the implicit bias, the mindset issues, and the ways in which we as a system have to be anti-racist to really disrupt some of these data trends. So that's just the Nikki answer, Commissioner Alexander, but I think a lot of it is around the mindset and how we respond to students differently, where you see this disproportionality in terms of both attendance and suspension.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also know that those communities were disproportionately hit with COVID in terms of positivity rates and potentially for needing to quarantine because a family member was positive and things like that. So we don't have good data on that. I mean, we know which of our students or staff reported being positive, but I would imagine that some of that big drop is both for what Deputy Superintendent Ford Marthel mentioned, as well as I think there is definitely an impact of COVID being disproportionate in those communities.
And can I ask a follow-up? So I appreciate that response. I think seems like it's right on. And I guess a follow-up, Chief Lau-Smith, in terms of going back to the restorative practices thing, because in my experience, in addition to the cultural competency training for teachers and connecting better with students and families, I think restorative practices is an approach, especially when it's embodied, into the life of the school and is including things like proactive circles. So, and I heard, I really appreciate the data you shared in the survey from 2019, and those numbers are kind of disturbing to me that only 22% of our schools are places where 80% of teachers regularly use classroom circles. Because to me, it seems like that's the kind of a practice that would address some of the things that Deputy Superintendent Ford Marthel was just talking about. And so I'm wondering, do we have a plan to the restorative practice is a research-based approach. We know that it works when implemented well. I get that there's a resource constraint, but I'm curious, what are our plans around changing these numbers, or what would it take? If it's a resource question, I think, again, this is where I would like the board to really have to make some of these hard decisions when it comes to budget. And as you know, I think one of my frustrations with the budget process has been that sometimes it's been difficult to even get to that level of conversation and then we end up in this situation where it's like, as you and I have discussed, sites versus central, right? And it's like, so I'm arguing just keep the money in the sites, but we're never really having the conversation of actually we could invest $1 million a year in restorative practices, and this is what we would get, but we'd have to give up X, Y, or Z in order to do so. But I'm curious, like, do we have a plan that could be implemented if we had resources, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think we have embedded restorative practices into many of the things that we have created in terms on the side of the student family services side, you know, the family partnership model, the coordinated care team approach and things like that. And so I think that, and I do think that there's many things on the curriculum side. I know that blanking, authentic partnership was a really big part in the Initiate Wonder in the middle schools. So I think what we really are trying to do, and I know Nikki, Deputy Superintendent Formerthel, and I have, we meet much more often than probably pre-pandemic, our predecessors, to try to coordinate all this. So I think what we need next is just something that I think we hear the board has been asking for, and we're sort of starting with this functional analysis, and we really want to start looking at how do we design a budget that speaks to the values and get to that sort of what I think of as like a forced choice. Like we have so many priorities, and which ones are going to bubble to the top. And so I know that's something that we're talking about a lot, but I do really believe that as a district, we've developed a lot of really great tools and resources to do it, and then it's like creating a program that implements with response to intervention in schools, which is some of the work that's with the CSACE plan. It's another acronym, which you told me what it stands for, and now I forgot. Coordinated Early Intervention Services. Yeah.
Intermediate, yeah.
And so I think that and listening to the literacy presentation, like that's also some of it. Like how do we do that through our instructional core and then wrap around the student and family services? And I also think the opportunity that we're working really closely as we move towards social workers and nurses supervised day to day at the school level, there's a whole bunch of other systems that we're also going to be not unwrapping, talking with LEAD on how do we work together. So I think at the end, I guess my answer is I think we have the content and the tools and the resources. I would say we don't have a plan or an idea of how much that plan would cost.
Just was going to add, you're being nice tonight. I think we lack people and infrastructure, right? Because for any plan that we have, I mean, this whole resolution was a whole plan. The issue is that we don't have the consistent staff to build the capacity of the folks who are on the ground doing this and support them. So we have professional development, but it's often optional, and it's not necessarily ongoing at the consistency that I, as a classroom teacher who knows how to teach language arts, might need. But we know that any good PD is only as good as the folks who are implementing the practice in the classroom, which often means you need coaching to support that. And so you're not just looking at a PD. You're not just looking at a PD plan. You're looking at a PD plan with staff who can go in and support and coach a teacher in implementing that plan, or a school team in implementing that. You also need people because, again, I went to school to learn how to be a teacher, to teach ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, right? And now we're talking about social emotional. Now we're talking about responding to babies who get triggered. Now restore, right? And so you also need some folks who have some level of expertise outside of my expertise that I can rely on. And when I'm thinking about what are some interventions that this baby might need, or how do I support this student differently, we're not just sitting here and doing our same 5 interventions that we know, because those are the things that were done when I was in school, et cetera. So I would offer that in addition to everything that Chief Melody Smith said, don't get mad at me, we need those people. And as I think about the slide that is to come around next steps, that's one of the feedbacks that we're getting from site leaders and from LEAD, is that there is a muscle that needs to be built here if we want to do this work and do it well. And we need people to build that muscle, and we need people to actually create the systems and the structures to make sure that it actually gets implemented with fidelity, and that there's some ability to follow up and really support the folks who are supporting the babies on the ground.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that's also why the prioritizing has to happen, because we can't do it all, as you all know. And I think, and I'll just, for one, I mean, I've experienced it with restorative practices. I mean, when we were at June Jordan, we had started on this journey a little bit before this resolution passed. And when this resolution passed, we had intensive support from the district to be able to do this work. We had training, we had coaching. The first generation of these materials that we have that are really good was developed back then. And it made such a huge difference because all of a sudden I had stuff I could pull from. I had all these things. I could call people and say, oh, will you come and train our whole staff? And that made, I mean, it made all the difference in the world. And but we also weren't trying to do 6 things. We were saying, this is what we're focused on this year, along with one other goal around academics. So we had a school culture thing and we had an academic thing that we were going deep on. But we saw the results. We saw a decline in suspensions. We saw a decline in out-of-class referrals. We saw improved student climate surveys, all those things with that focus. And so I think I would just hope that we all can kind of figure this out of like, how do we pick the things that we know are research-based and that we invest in them, right? And that we say, this is something we're going to do across the district or in pilot areas or grade levels, whatever it is, but then we go deep on 2 or 3 things rather than trying to, I think we've often just said, well, we've passed all these resolutions, we've done all this stuff, so we're just gonna do everything and not do it well. So I'm ready to help make some of those hard decisions, but I know that getting to that process is a challenge, but I just want to say I think we need to collectively do it.
If we could just finish the presentation and then we'll.
I thought we had finished.
No, sorry. I think there's one or two.
Can you go 2 slides over just because we, sorry, 2 slides forward to the last slide, I think. Next. No, that's it. Okay, just because we just started talking about continued areas of needs and next steps, it just made sense to go here. I think I've already spoken about just the need for consistent professional development that is not optional. That is something that we've heard loud and clear. Just to the point that Commissioner Alexander just made, there were services and there were quote unquote experts or folks that you can call from the school site if you needed some additional support or if a case was outside of your bandwidth. And so there has been a call to revive and bring back what we had before, which is called the SFUSD consultancy. So these were folks who were staff members of what's the new SFCSD? Student and Family Services, the name changed recently, but who a school can call and say, hey, can you come to this meeting? I need some support with this student. And that consultancy is no longer available at the same frequency that it was before. Sites continue to need more help with interventions and just more resources of what outside of my 5 tricks can I do to support this student. Of course, we're looking for more opportunities for sites to get together and share best practices and align around what they're doing. And then, of course, the infrastructure. But the other thing that's the top one is that we need, and we're moving towards having a shared understanding of what tiered interventions are and what tier 1 is. And I'm going to look at you, Commissioner Hsu. In the same way that tier 1 for instruction is about that first teach, the thing that everybody gets, and then the degrees of support changes as you go up the pyramid. That's the same idea when you talk about social emotional and behavioral support for students, right? And so there should be some basic practices and things that are in place school-wide. And if those things are implemented well, and if there's a positive culture, and if there's a culture of celebration, et cetera, then the students and the situations that need more intensive intervention and support should actually get smaller, which is why the pyramid, if y'all didn't notice, it gets smaller when it gets to the top, because the idea is you focus most of your energy on that first tier, on everyone. And what we know is that across our sites, across SFUSD, folks have different understandings of what this tiered intervention should look like. And there are some places where, the mindset and the thinking is, this is outside of my scope, so I need to send this kid out to someone else for someone else to deal. And so that taxes the system, right? Because now you're getting a very expensive and intensive supports for a baby who maybe just needed this one little thing. And so really getting us aligned as a system of what tiered intervention really looks like and what it should mean is one of the main things that we're saying we need to do as a next step. So I just wanted to hop to there because we were talking about next steps. Now, if we can go 2 slides back. We got some bright spots. There's lots of amazing things happening around this resolution and around this work. The first that I want to highlight is that even when we went into distance learning, we saw so many of our schools and so many of our educators who were still focused on positive behavior support and making sure that our students felt welcome and a part of a community. All of our sites now, and I said, Lead, are you sure we can say all? Each school site has a coordinated care team. And that is an amazing shift. The names of these teams have changed, and we, during pandemic, we went to coordinated care, but this is probably the first time that we can say that every single school Has any team? Yes, you agree with me, Miss? I'm looking at you, bro. Okay. Every single school. Now, but that's like baseline, right? That's now we have the structure and we got some people. And so again, back to building their capacity is going to be the next step. Many, if not all of our sites have specific PBS plans and school-wide behavior interventions. And that was modeled after the one that Melee and team created some years back. As a system, we've identified a focus on family partnerships, and that was actually identified last year. And we wanted to make sure our families had consistent and coherent experiences across all of our schools. That's been our work. LEAD has been working a lot more diligently to review site data around suspensions, referrals, and even attendance with their leaders during check-ins and during cohort meetings. So there's a more regular monitoring of that data and opportunities for us to respond when we see places where the suspension rates are high for certain demographics or the attendance issues are starting to sneak up. Next slide, please. And then, really just trying to, as we always talk about, there's more work that needs to be done. And this slide just wants to celebrate the work that is happening with just some examples from different school sites. We really try to include our students in our PBIS frameworks and our restorative practices. And so you see at the top, there's actually a little video that students made that helped their peers learn about wanted and unwanted behavior, which is a part of positive behavior intervention and support. You see on the right-hand side on the top, a peace path, a restorative circle, I think from Malcolm X Academy. At the bottom, you see a student matrix where students are learning to kind of monitor and see what's the expected behavior, set goals around their engagement and track that. And then at the older grades, you'll see that there's students who are working together to plan assemblies, to do student weeks, to lead peer events and morning meetings. And so this is just an example of some of the things that are happening at many of our sites. Again, our work and our next step is to make it not where it's something that happens here or there, but it's a consistent experience across all of our school sites. And that is the end of our presentation.
Thank you so much. And also I want to appreciate the celebrations of the good things that are happening across our district. So if, I don't see any public, but I'll say it anyway. If you'd like to speak to this item, please approach the podium. We have 1 minute. All right, commissioners, any more comments? Or? I already had my discussion. Commissioner Shu?
So this resolution was passed in 2014, right? And I hear Commissioner Alexander say that before there had been good outcomes. And is it because of the pandemic that would kind of, or what happened that?
It was, sorry. I think mostly it's a resource, and many other resolutions were passed between 2014 and now. And as Nikki said, our attention got split on many things. So you lose the funding resource, as I mentioned, the $1 million because out of the SACE funding. And then a lot of other focuses that the same people are being asked to do many other different things. So if we're asked to do the coordinated care approach and implement the restorative practices and do the Latinx resolution and all of the other very important work, and I think it gets to what Commissioner Alexander was saying, is we didn't prioritize, we just added. And so it's sort of like the newest thing that comes up becomes the next thing that we put whatever resources we have in, and that means it's taken away from another place.
Can I just add on to that as well, because that's very accurate. Sites have been tasked with more, for lack of a better word, jobs from our central office. So like right now, site administrators have to do their own hiring, all this, stuff like through Empower that they never had to do before. And that's not from the board. That's not a resolution. That's more duties that are, and this as a principal, I know it as a principal firsthand. Your combination plate is already full and they've added another taco. So it overflows. And so, yes, there have been board resolutions, and this is one of them, which I happen to agree with this resolution. But there's also been a lot more put on sites, what they have to do to satisfy what central office wants them to do. And that's been a historic problem in this district.
And I just want to add, with my site leader hat on, there's also the reality that a lot of sites are doing these things teachers are staffing these committees and these groups right on top of their all-day job. And it's oftentimes, and the two principals can say if it's true or not for their sites, but in my experience, it's the same teachers who are on all the different committees. So at some point, again, then the system gets taxed and folks are not really able to really move the work as they could if that was something they were really able to focus on. And stipends help, but you're adding still another set of duties on top of my full day job. So that's been a challenge, especially for those sites that only have, like, we were talking about this today with Ms. Rice Mitchell in cohort 3. Some sites have, small staff as well. So it's the same 10 people doing everything.
And at the risk of being too philosophical, I mean, I think there's that saying, every system is designed perfectly to get the results it gets, right? And I think so with these, with these changes, we're actually trying to do something a little bit countercultural, right? Restorative practices is not the norm in schools. So, I mean, kids are still going to show up and, people are going to do math or English to the best of their ability and whatever's happening. So that's why I think the additional resources become necessary, because like you were saying earlier, we need coaching and support because we're also supporting teachers and other school staff to change how they do things in order to get different results, whether that's improving how they teach reading or improving classroom climate, which also improves how kids learn reading. But I agree. I think the analysis is that we've done too many. Instead of focusing on here's our 3 high leverage strategies to do that, we've said here's 27 different things, and it's kind of the flavor of the year. I've seen a lot of that happening.
So that falls on us to prioritize so that the staff can do 3 things instead of 10 or a dozen? Is that what we're saying here?
I think it's a combination of what the staff's capacity is, as well as what the board feels are the priorities. Because we're all one team, it's not an us versus them. So we have to work with our staff to figure out what the priorities are. And like, for example, the restorative practices training, that came before this resolution. That was Kim Shree-Moffice's resolution, I think 2 years prior to that. We focused a lot of attention and resources to get school sites up and running with the restorative practices. Then this resolution came and added on to that, which was a good thing, I think, at the time, when we had the resources to get it off the ground, but it petered out over time because there were competing interests, but also because it was a new flavor coming down. But I've always supported this resolution because I think it's sound. There are things within it that really support a positive climate for our schools, particularly the schools that are struggling the most, so that they can have kids coming to school feeling like they belong, as has been said, and also helping to change the mindset of the adults in the room and in the building so that they can change their perception of certain students in our district who have historically been targeted, in my view. And then that's why they don't want to come to school.
So I have 2 more questions. One is there a list of all the things that, all the resolutions and all the priorities that you've been tasked with? Does somebody have a list? Maybe we can put together a list so that we can try to examine and prioritize.
We do, there is a board resolution tracker, which I know that we have, and I'm sure we can make it available. We'll talk to Chief Hogendijk about that, but
Yes,
it exists.
That'd be great. Yes, thank you if you can provide that. Second question is to this particular restorative practice resolution. Is there data showing outcomes like increased graduation rates or better test scores or something like that associated with this practice being implemented?
So I think I think we have both anecdotal and school-specific experiences where school really dug into and implemented the resolution where we may be able to see an increase. It's always very hard, as Chief Connor would say and Devin would say, is to do a cause and effect. Because we did this, graduation rates increased. Where we were when sort of the implementation of the resolution got stalled because of the resources was really being able to measure the tiered fidelity inventory. That was the reason for doing that, to look at if a school was implementing positive behavior interventions systems, practices, 85% of the time, and we just started measuring restorative practices. Like, it was happening at June Jordan, but we didn't know what was happening across the entire district. So being able to look at those two things and then have some confidence in the fidelity of the intervention would be at a time where then we could look at, because of this, we have higher graduation rates. I mean, that's the thing about trying to get to data, is you have to have fidelity of intervention, and you have to be methodical, which I'm hearing the commissioners talk about, of what you're doing to see if it is making the differences you want to make.
Well, and that's another reason why you can't do 16 things, because then you don't know what actually worked,
You
right?
conflate everything, right?
And I mean, and I would just say the only thing I would add is I think there's interim data points. Like for us, one of our big trackers was out of class referrals, right? So those hall walkers at Galileo, right? If you implement, I would argue, my theory of action as a principal would be, if as our staff, we all commit to restorative practices and engaging in cultural tier 1 interventions that are going to keep kids in classrooms, that we're going to see a reduction in those numbers, right? And we would track attendance in classes. We would track, maybe we'd have people walk the building and say, how many people do we see in the halls, and just do some data collection that way. But I think that would be, like at a school-based level, you can absolutely track that. And then I think you can extrapolate. I mean, you can not extrapolate, but take that up to the level of the district.
I just have a couple comments, actually. Well, one is that in the past reports, we've included police detentions and arrests as one of our data points. And they are predictable, of course, the outcomes there. And then also secondary referrals out of the class. So, because we do have those, they're not like elementary. Elementary doesn't really have actual referrals, but secondary does. And so when we look at that, when we total the out of class time, from referrals to suspensions to detentions to expulsions, like you will get a better picture of which kids are actually not in school. And you add on the chronic absenteeism, then you really get a better picture of really how much time kids are actually not in, I'm beating a dead horse, I know, in the classroom, availing themselves of the expertise of their teachers and their peers. So I would hope that in the future we can also have those data points embedded in the report.
Yeah, so two things on that. As you know, the Board of Education decided to end the memorandum of understanding with
No,
the.
I know, but there still are detentions. There still are police being called to sites.
Yeah, we have some of that data, but we don't have detention. So we know when we are tracking whether or not the police were called to our schools, versus the data we used to share with you is from the SFPD. So we can share the former in the board presentation. So that's helpful for clarity. The other thing you're talking about is out of class discipline referrals. I think we call them ODRs. And that was the collection of those referrals was through a system that we don't have any longer due to budget cuts. And the reporting of that was not consistent across all schools. So even the data we were sharing it didn't reflect what was happening at all schools. But we can definitely share the data that we have for the number of times the police were called to a school as part of that.
Do we know which kids are being, for example, questioned by the police if they're called in?
I don't know if we have, so if police come to the campus and request to question a student, we have a board policy that requires a policy and for schools to fill out a form. I don't have that data. I guess we can ask the lead, because it isn't collected centrally, but it would go to the lead assistant superintendent. Right. So Nikki and I can look into about the actual versus our principals, who are also required to call the police under certain circumstances, calling the police to our campus versus having a police officer show up.
Okay. So is there, in the future, is there a way that we can capture referrals even though we're not? I mean, is there a way? I mean, that's really important information. I mean, when I got to Horace Mann as the principal, there were 1,700 referrals. There were only 300 kids. There were 1,700 referrals the year before I got there. So that was a really good, for me as the incoming principal, I knew I had to reduce that. That was my theory of action, right? Like if there are fewer referrals, kids are in their classroom, right? Yeah. So they're getting more learning time.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Whatever we hear about, we capture, but I don't know if we hear about everything, so it's another system to think about.
There's the synergy module.
Yeah. It's not consistently used. We have a lot of systems collect data, but it's not consistently
Are we still using basis? Basis?
We don't have basis anymore. That was one of the things that ended with the budget cut, and we were trying to shift over to, and there was a lot of confusion, like, is it basis, is it synergy? We only want one system to report to. So we were working, this was pre-pandemic. We spent about a year, again, a pretty robust conversation about how do we take the synergy, some new modules. I think it's called the response to intervention. It's a different module that can go on to synergy to capture some of these things, but that got stalled due to resources and with the pandemic. So we collect information that we know is coming into us about police referrals. And so we're doing a lot of things not as systemically as we would like to.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions?
So this, we're required to file update twice a year? Is it? For this resolution?
For this resolution, there are 2 presentations a year. I'm sorry?
Forever?
In perpetuity, I guess.
I was actually going to bring that up. Thank you for saying that. Because the resolution isn't necessarily being implemented to the fidelity we would like, obviously, I think that the board can modify that requirement that's in the resolution. Obviously, we can do whatever we want, but I think that we might want just something that is presented to the board through electronically, but not presented.
Right, we can do written, and the resolution that it doesn't specifically say it has to be a presentation. We can do a written update as well.
That's just been our practice. So
yeah,
if there's no objection, I think that we can make that the future practice, unless there's something that changes. Do you want to?
Well, I'm just wondering, I mean, this is a longer conversation, but I'm wondering if we can move toward having a system of priorities, and we're saying that's based on a strategic plan. So instead of the board passing.
I just have to say that that's out of the scope of this committee, because you're right. I mean, but I agree, we should do that, but we can't really have that discussion here. I think we'd have to agendize that as an item. Am I correct, legal counsel?
Yes, I mean, the full board would have to put it on and then refer it to committee, maybe, yeah.
I was just saying, as a general principle, as an alternative to reporting on individual resolutions, I wonder if we could propose to board leadership a system where
I agree.
The board and superintendent are setting priorities, and that we don't pass new resolutions that aren't part of that, right? That the resolution might amend that, but it's not gonna. That's all.
Do resolutions die? Ever?
Otherwise.
So.
I'm sorry, that tracker would really help. Just.
So there is a tracker. We just really can't discuss much more out of the scope of this.
Well, can we ask board? I mean,
yes.
I'm saying as an outcome from this committee, can we ask board leadership?
Yes.
At least look at all the resolutions so that all of us together can.
And I would just say that there are also administrative policies that have been passed that we don't track that die also, right? That just become out of favor, right? So both happen. There are things that are driven solely by administration for administrators to do and to move to the sites to do, and those fluctuate over time as well. But we don't track those.
But if they're dead, then they're dead. We don't care.
We don't care.
That they're not using anymore other people's times.
Right.
It's the ones that are actively being worked on, and there's so many. That's the ones that we need to review and do something.
Okay, so for future discussions, I'll be happy to talk to board leadership about that. Okay, so with that, thank you all. I know it was a long meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much. And thank you for your work.